We'll call this meeting back to order. As it is 1:04 and we have a delegation. Could I have someone move approval of the agenda? Moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Crompton. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. And 4.1, we have the Director of Marketing from the Caribou Coast Tourism Marketing Association, Sydney Redpath.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you for being here. Welcome. We are excited to hear what you have to say.
Absolutely. Am I free to get started?
Go right ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair and Directors, for your time this afternoon. My name is Sydney Redpath, and I have been the Director of Marketing for Caribou-Chilcotin Coast Tourism for the past 3.5 years. Throughout my time, I will be giving an overview and context to pages, I believe, 14 to 19 of your package. As you can see on your agenda, there is a request for a letter of support from our organization regarding our August 1st application for renewal of our regional, municipal, and regional district tax program, referred to as MRDT. MRDT is a 3% consumer tax applied to the sales of short-term fixed roof accommodations. These funds are reserved for the uses of tourism promotion under the provincial tax code. And this process of renewal that we're currently engaged in is required by the province of British Columbia every 5 years and involves obtaining support from our voting eligible overnight accommodators and our respective municipalities and regional district bodies. Within our Caribou-Chilcotin Coast collection area, this is actually only applicable to electoral areas A and B within the SLRD. Prior to the start of the regional marketing, the regional MRDT program, there were very minimal dollars for tourism promotion for our smaller communities and our rural areas. As compared to the majority of other destinations in British Columbia that had access to MRDT funding, we were at an extreme disadvantage when it came to creating awareness and thus favorability of tourism within the Caribou-Chilcotin Coast. And to give you a sense of what we were and what we are competing against, in 2019, over 74 million of MRDT dollars were used to market tourism destinations within BC. Since May of 2018, which was when we started the regional MRDT collection, we have leveraged about 2.5 million MRDT dollars into just about 4.5 million of marketing programming to Caribou-Chilcotin Coast tourism businesses. And some highlights of these efforts include garnering over 250 million impressions, 105,000 direct referrals to tourism businesses, over 1 million website visits, over 1,500 television commercials, and joint campaigns with Cal Tire and the History Channel. And after the first year of the program, prior to COVID-19, obviously, we had also achieved a 7% increase in overnight accommodation revenues, exceeding our target of 5%. Throughout COVID-19, perhaps most importantly to our businesses, these dollars have been especially important as the majority of our businesses saw their revenues and thus their marketing dollars disappear overnight. And we have been able to keep marketing on behalf of our businesses and our communities, either driving visitation when it was permissible to do so, or inspiring consumers to think about their future travels. Respective to the SLRD, I've had very important conversations with directors Demare and Birch Jones about our shared priorities going forward regarding tourism within their respective areas. It is of utmost importance to us that our definition of tourism promotion is not just driving as much visitation as possible within the shortest amount of time. It's about ensuring that we're attracting the right visitors when our businesses and our communities have capacity, our residents are willing to welcome them, and that we prioritize educating prospective travelers on their expectations of traveling safe and responsibly while they're here. It's also about collaborating with our community and our First Nation groups to ensure we maintain the balance of inviting people to our homes that are going to be respectful and leave it better than when they found it and when they came here. And I like to leave as much time as possible for questions. So I'm happy to answer any that you may have for the remainder of my time.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Are there any questions from anybody? Go ahead.
I'll just make a comment. We did have a very good conversation, and especially around respecting our neighborhoods and our environment and our wildlife, which Ms. Redpath mentioned. So it's very progressive, and I'm in support of the letter.
Great. Thank you. Director Burch-Jones.
Just on the heels of that, yes, and thank you very much for the time you took, Sydney Redpath, to chat with me. And I think you guys are doing a great job, and I will be in support of the support letter.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else with questions or comments at this point? Yeah, I think I would just add that it is such a diverse region, and it's such a, it's, without sounding sort of silly, it's such a beautiful gem in an area that it really surprises you. And I think that when people have the opportunity to go there, they are struck by what a different landscape it is from just an hour south or just an hour east of there. And the ability to kind of create a product far away from airports and far away from the lower mainland, something that's so unique, and doing that with respect and reverence for the area is really, really important. And I think you do a wonderful job. So thank you very much for that. Would anyone like to make the motion that we write the letter of support? Moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Demare. Any comments? Seeing none, is there anyone opposed? Motion carries.
I'll just like to make one more comment.
Certainly.
The picture with the sun shining with the balsam root, that's one of my favorite places.
Where's that? Which picture?
That's on the trail. It's in
Oh, right.
South Chilcotin Mountain Provincial Park on the trail heading towards Spruce Lake. And the mountain in the very far background, just to the right where the sun is, it's Mount Sheba. And there's a story to it I'll maybe share one day with you.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we'll say thank you, and thanks for being here today.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, with that, we'll move along. Could I have someone move the consent agenda? Moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Demare. Go ahead.
I'd like to pull 5.25.
Okay. 5.25 will become.
We will look at this 11.7, please.
Okay,
Turn the lights back on.
sure, thank you.
Great. So you find it a little easier on your eyes, or maybe just turn that off. Okay.
I'm not going contrary to Vivian, so I'm just going to say.
Put the ones at the end on.
That's fine. Yeah. I'm
You want
fine
these
either way.
ones up here?
I'm fine either way. Yeah, great.
Just take it.
All right, so with that item pulled, could I have, I'll call the question. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes? None. We'll move on to 7.1.1. The EAD recommendations, request for decision regarding Area C Development Variance Permit 169. Oh, Director Matt?
Yeah, I'll move that. I guess all for that.
Before that, okay, we have moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Burch-Jones. Thank you for being here, Director Needham. Does anybody have any questions? No questions. We've already moved and seconded it. Are there any comments? Go ahead.
So with the covenant on overnight accommodation, Is that something that gets put in place and then only gets revisited if there's a complaint, or is there some sort of follow-up on something like that?
We'll turn that over to Director Needham.
Hi. Sorry, this is with respect to which item, sorry?
7.1.1, the development variance permit number 169. District lot 210, where are we?
711.
Sorry, and what was the question? My apologies.
It's about the setbacks and it's the variance for setbacks and usage there. And it says that we put a covenant on it restricting against overnight accommodation. And I'm just curious, and I think I know the answer, but I just want to hear it anyway. Once a covenant like this is signed off on, it only gets revisited in the event of a complaint. Is that correct?
Yeah, typically, if we received a complaint, we would definitely look into some form of bylaw enforcement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. 7.1.2, this is a direction request regarding agritourism accommodation regulations temporary use permit at Sergeant Hamer Electoral Area D. Is anyone going to speak to this?
No, just if there are questions. I'll move it.
Moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Demare. Any questions or comments from anybody?
I could make just a brief comment.
Certainly.
I think this is absolutely critical that we do this with regard to requests for overnight accommodation throughout the Upper Squamish Valley. And I think it should be part of a larger study. This is a study in itself, but there are other things that we need to pay attention to in that valley. So I really hope, the starting point is for this to go ahead.
Okay, Director Stoner and then Director Crompton.
Yeah, I'm just curious if staff can speak to implications with respect to staff time and prioritization of work, given that this seems like it's a fair bit of work before considering a temporary use permit. So what does that look like in terms of timing?
Director Needham can speak to that. We chatted on this earlier.
Yeah, thanks. So I don't think it's going to have a large impact on staff workload. We will be preparing a draft policy and we'll be forwarding it to the Squamish CAN and the Ashley Foundation for some input. And then we're hoping that we can bring this either to the July or the August board meeting.
Great, thank you. And Director Crompton.
Through the chair to Director Needham as well, can you quickly just give me a sense of how these temporary use permit, this work interacts with farm use 12 uses a year? Are these two things dealing with the same issue on land that either is or is not in production? Am I understanding that correctly? I'm not sure.
Yeah. So just to explain a little bit, land in the ALR that has farm status is allowed to have agritourism uses, and they may apply for agritourism accommodation uses. So agritourism, it's things like, petting zoos, corn mazes, sunflower mazes, these kinds of things. So they're allowed to do those as of right. Then there is the gatherings for an event category, which is slightly different. They get 10 gatherings for an event per year if they have farm status. So that could be a wedding. That's typically what people do, but a party or some such event could also occur on farmland. So this agritourism accommodation piece is typically associated with a farm that is already demonstrating that they're doing agritourism. And so we feel that we really need to put some policies together as to how we will consider agritourism accommodation, particularly in the Upper Squamish Valley, because we've been receiving some complaints about things going on up there, and there are certain noise issues that have to be attended to.
So your work, so your work would be an additional layer over what currently exists on ALR land that's in production. We would be asking for temporary use permits that would be over and above those 10 allowed. So if you're going to use those 10 allowed, you'd also have to get a temporary use permit?
Okay, I think we might be speaking about two different things. So
Yeah, that's what I thought.
one is gatherings for an event.
Yeah.
So there, each farm with farm status is allowed 10 of those as of right.
You're right. Sorry.
Agritourism accommodation is another animal that we are allowed to regulate, but we just need to have some parameters around it. So it wouldn't be a permit that people would necessarily need to get, but it would be a policy. So if people are applying to us to have that, they would have to comply with the requirements of a policy, and that's what we want to work on. And in the report, you'll note that there are some ideas raised, such as should there be a minimum parcel size? Should the property have a proven record of having no bylaw complaints or noise complaints? You know, should we be requiring these things, these uses to be certified by the Canadian Standards Association? Because as we know, tiny homes are not, and so they pose fire and life and safety risk. So the ALC gives us these powers to regulate things, but they don't really put a lot of detail in some of their policies. So this would be adding a bit of detail that would guide both staff, the public, and the board in terms of how we decide whether these things are appropriate or not.
So my final question is, so if I was to do this now, do a agritourism accommodation, I would just comply with existing ALR rules. After this, I would comply with ALR rules plus our TUP overlay.
No, sorry. So right now, we require these uses to be permitted. They're not allowed as of right. And this is why we're seeing this application for this TUP.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm grateful.
Okay. Go ahead. Tony, did you want to say?
I'm just going to repeat what I said before earlier, that this is one piece of a puzzle. The larger issue that this board has to grapple with is the future of the Upper Squamish Valley, the quality of life up there, whether we're going to really push development of agriculture. We have a situation now where there are at least 3 places that I know that are running their 10 events a year. We could get to a point where there were 10 places running 10 events a year. It would destroy the peace, the tranquility, the lifestyle for a lot of people in that valley. And we need to grapple with that. I'm getting complaints on a regular basis about noise, about traffic, about parties, you know, the liquor that goes along with parties. We really have to take a good look at it and decide how are we going to work with the other people that are concerned, like the Ashton Foundation, which represents the residents of the valley, the Squamish organizations that are working on development of farming. So anything that we can do now, I think, to provide some reasonable boundaries and regulations, the better for us now and for the future. It's very difficult to stop things once we've allowed them to happen. So,
Okay, with that, I will call the question. Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. 7.1.3 is request for decision design guidelines for affordable and multifamily housing OCP amendments. And we're considering first reading. Is there a presentation?
no,
No, okay. Does anyone want to move first reading? Do you have questions? Okay, go ahead, Director Elliott, then Director Stoner.
It talks about massing, and it says there's a 45 meter in length or width. I'm just wondering what that's based on.
Go ahead, Ms. Katerniak.
So a lot of these policies that are put forward, they're based on BC housing standards.
Okay, does that answer your question, or did you want to follow up?
So it's based on BC housing standards that.
Yeah. So this is what they determined to be the best approach to massing.
Director Stoner, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was curious why we didn't try and establish a minimum number of percentage of 3-bedroom units. So appreciate that in there, there's a maximum of 20% of studio units, but we still tend to see developers err towards the 1-bedrooms as opposed to family size units. And I think it's more important to set a minimum threshold for the family size units. And so I'm just curious why we haven't included that in the policy.
Turn that to staff, go ahead. Ms.
So that can certainly be included going forward. Thank you for your feedback.
And then I had another question in terms of the design guidelines. There's the first bullet point speaks to character. And that one always really challenges me. It's often used kind of by those who don't really want to see change in their neighborhoods. They speak to kind of trying to maintain that neighborhood character. And so I'm just wondering if there's other language that we can use that speaks to, I think what we're trying to get at is making sure that new developments have intentional transitions and are sensitive to the existing neighborhoods, but not entrenching that kind of narrative around maintaining a neighborhood character, because without any new development is going to change the character of a neighborhood. And so I'm just concerned that if we bake this into a policy like this, then it just entrenches that narrative of kind of trying to protect my neighborhood character and not really being able to define what that is as neighborhoods evolve over time.
It's a really good point. Director Rick Jones, did you have your hand up?
Oh, well, it's just, that's why we had it removed from B, but it is in C and D, yes.
Okay.
And then I had one other question, which was, I'm just curious why we're including kitchen design guidelines. I feel like most of our policies don't really direct what the inside of a building can look like. We have control around zoning and external features, but I've never really seen kitchen design guidelines in policy.
Yeah, that's true. Is that from BC Housing as well?
Yeah, so a lot of these are taken from BC housing guidelines. Certain kitchen designs are considered to be more livable than others. And it's just as an attempt to ensure that developers practice best practices in how they design these homes.
I think those are typically recommendations for suites within larger homes, because if you just put in a galley, which is just a countertop and a hot plate, that does not make a kitchen. And these are much more directive about creating an actual home space. So you could certainly request that that's changed if you.
I guess to follow up on that, I'm not familiar enough with the BC housing guidelines and which pieces have been taken for this policy and which haven't. So I wonder if it's actually better just to refer in this policy to the BC housing guidelines where we've done so, or more broadly and say, this is kind of the standard that we expect. And then where we're deviating from the BC housing guidelines and expecting a higher bar, then we enumerate that in the policy.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Katriniak, and then Ms. Needham.
Yeah, so that is the approach we took for area A, to sort of just refer to BC housing guidelines. What is included in the proposed guidelines for the OCPs is just what we consider as more important, as sort of what we would hope that the developer focuses on. Such as balcony, storage space, these sorts of things. The BC housing guidelines, it's a very large document with a lot of policies, and the approach here was to sort of focus on what is important to the SLRD. But certainly another approach would be to simply refer to BC housing guidelines.
Go ahead, Ms. Needham.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember these are guidelines. So they're not hard and fast rules like one would find in a zoning bylaw. And as Ms. Katerniak noted, the bullet points that are in the report and in the guidelines really point to the key items that we would like to see. And with respect to kitchens, this is really in response to applications that we've seen in other communities for micro suites and these type of very small living accommodations that are really not very livable. And so this is just to make it front and center for developers that, you know, these are the things that we would be looking for to make a unit actually a livable unit.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments at this point? Director Mack? No? Okay. Go ahead.
I'm just curious if staff can speak to their preferred way of moving forward with respect to including a minimum number of 3-bedroom units and removing the reference to neighborhood character. If we can still pass these motions as is with that feedback, or if you want to come back.
I think we can pass the motions with the recommendation that those items be tweaked in the bylaw before it comes back for second reading.
Okay. All right. That satisfies that. Anyone else? Would anyone like to make the motions? Yep, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Can we do in sets
In
of
blocks?
twos? Yeah.
Yep. So,
Then I'll move the first two dots for the electoral area B.
okay, so area B, first reading and referrals, moved by Director Rich Jones, seconded by Director Crompton. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. First reading and referrals for area C, moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Rainbow. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. And first reading and referrals for area D, moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Demare. Anyone opposed? Motion carries.
Sure. And do we want those recommendations in a resolution?
And we'll make the resolution that the, go ahead.
I'll move that staff incorporate a minimum percentage of 3-bedroom units, minimum of 20% 3-bedroom units, as well as removing the reference to character in the design guidelines.
Okay, moved by Director Stoner, second by Director Crompton. Any discussion? Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for that. All right. Okay, move along to 7.1.4, which is the Goldbridge transfer station fees and charges. And I see Director Belsham here. And Ms. LeBlanc is here online. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Angela Belsham, Director of Environmental Services with the SLRD, and I'll pass it over to Marie-Lou LeBlanc, who will present this afternoon.
Thank you. I'm Marie-Lou LeBlanc, Resource Recovery Coordinator for the SLRD. So staff is very mindful of your time, so we'll do a quickly update and leave time for questions. So staff is here today to present a request for proposal for the Gorbous Transfer Station Fees and Charges Bylaw number 1761-2022. Staff presented the request for decision at the June 8, 2022 EAD committee meetings. At that time, we addressed the feedbacks from the April 11 EAD meeting. And the purpose of this proposed bylaw is to, effective September 1st, 2022, to have an adjust tipping fees and also adjust languages at the bylaw. Basically, the previous bylaw was dated from 2005 and it was in need of a update. So that's what you have in front of you right now. I'm open to all your questions.
Question?
I just want to thank Director Belsham and Ms. Mary Lou for working with me on the changes, and I'll move it.
Okay.
First reading.
It's, well, the preferred here is to read first, second, and third and adopt.
First, second, and third.
But we'll do first three and then we'll adopt as a second motion. So moved by Director Demare, seconded by Director Birch Jones. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. And then could I have a motion that we adopt? Moved by Director Demare, seconded by Director Crompton. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And thank you very much, Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you.
7.1.5 is the water trailer for Birkenhead Lake Estates from Director Mack. And
I'll
this,
move this, please.
yep, moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Rainbow. Any comments? Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. Great, thank you. Peeves recommendation 7.2.1. Now only Mike and Russell vote. Moving in. Okay. Okay.
We're allowed to say anything?
You don't get to say anything.
Oh.
No, unless it's something nice about Mike.
Do we do this all the time?
No.
It could work against you.
Move it.
All right, moved by Mike, seconded by Russell. I'll call the question. Are either of you opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. And that was Recreation Services Fees and Charges Bylaw.
So that was first three readings, sorry. And then there's a motion.
And a second motion, this time moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Richmond. Are either of you opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. 7.2.2, funding requirements for the economic development and for arts and cultural recreation.
So can you clarify the voting rule on this one first?
We will do the same.
Okay, moved by Director Richmond, second by Director Mack. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right. 8.1, I see Stewart here. This is a request for decision regarding the Lillooet Main Street development, OCP and zoning amendment, third reading and MOTI approval. And we have Director Needham on the screen, and we've got Ms. Stewart here to speak to us about this very exciting project. Welcome.
Excellent, thank you. So just as a little recap for this project, we had a public information meeting held in February of 2022. And the amendment bylaws were given second reading by the board in April of 2022. And at which point we did refer out to the Pemberton Valley Diking District, and they provided comments. These were presented at the public hearing, which was held in May of 2022. And then really this report, we're coming back to the board for third reading. And I'll speak to, maybe just highlight the board comments, concerns that were raised at second reading, how those were brought forward at the public hearing, and then a little recap of the one public hearing submission we received. So at second reading, we did receive comments and concerns from the board around the concerns around the grandmother's slough, and requested that the stormwater management plan be referred to the Pemberton Valley Diking District for comment. There was also a request for information as to possible connections to the Friendship Trail. So I'll speak to the Pemberton Valley Diking District comments, which we received some really great input. They focused around proposed drainage solutions and ideas for further refinement around that grandmother slough. Also had ideas around snow removal and the need for that to be sort of factored into the parking area, as well as the potential for emergency preparedness to be factored into parking aspects as well. And just to note that these are really important comments, noting both opportunities and concerns. And the referral response has been shared with the proponent, and it was also shared at the public hearing, just these comments in general. And I think from staff's perspective, we'll be looking to address these more detailed at the development permit stage. And most of it all has to do with design. We've got lots of space on the site. So really we'll be factoring in the drainage solutions and the refinement there at the design stage as part of the development permit application process. And looking at the Friendship Trail, so SLRD staff requested information as to the current Friendship Trail route and potential connections to the Lillooet Main Street development. And I can just sort of share the information that was provided. Specifically, the Lillooet Lands and Resources is taking the lead role in the technical review and community consultation regarding the preferred route through the reserve lands, and that discussions are underway, yet a final route is still to be determined. Opportunities for immediate connection to the Lillooet Main Street development project can be explored as well at the development permit stage once this final route through the reserve lands is established. And, I guess just to note that approval of this rezoning will likely be considered by Lillooet when they're contemplating the preferred route. And I guess also wanted to note that this information was shared at the public hearing, which was held on May 17th. There were no public in attendance at the public hearing. We did receive one written submission, and this was from a direct neighbor. Some of the submission comments, I'll just summarize them. There was concern around the residential component, noting that 53 units were being provided for, an increase in population. And sort of the staff and component response to that is that the SLRD regional growth strategy and the SLRD housing need and demand study support mixed use development and modest density multifamily housing in Mount Currie, and specifically this location. There were concern about the number of cars, and I guess we just, from a staff perspective, they are providing the full parking requirements as per the Area C zoning bylaw, so that's 110 parking stalls. And the MOTI traffic impact assessment has been completed, as well as that this development has been contemplated in the larger sort of corridor traffic study. And there was a question about if an environmental study had been completed, and the answer is yes. An initial environmental review was completed by Cascade Environmental. Servicing capacity was also confirmed from Vancouver Coastal Health, and riparian area protection regulations will be implemented as part of the development permit process. There was a question around how noise issues will be managed, and the proponent has clarified that the rental housing units will be prioritized for Lillooet Nation members, but is not limited only to band members, and that the proponent also communicated that the nonprofit housing society would be set up to manage the units, including any noise complaints. And then finally, there was a sort of a question, and it was put out there, a request that a fence be built around the property to protect the neighboring lands and creeks. And, noting that fencing options can be explored through the development permit process. The proponent did have some concerns about, potential visual impacts of the fencing and what that does to the sense of sort of community feel, but like I said, those pieces are all designed and can be addressed through the development permit stage. So from staff's perspective, the issues, opportunities, concerns that were identified by the board, the Pemberton Valley Diking District, as well as some members of the public as part of the public hearing process, have been adequately addressed for the zoning amendment process, and that a lot of the finer details can be worked out through the development permit stage. And I think one thing to note here too is we do have this area in Mount Currie is subject to like a form and character DP, so that's sort of not across the board in Area C, but is applicable in this specific instance. And I'll leave it at that. Happy to take any questions. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Stuart. And thank you for following up on those thoughts or concerns. I'm glad to hear the Friendship Trail is a live conversation, and as long as it's live and ongoing, then that's good enough for me. With regards to the PVDD comments about the drainage, and I know you said it'll get dealt with at the DP stage. I just, the comments from the PVDD are that the high-level solutions in the referral document are not an effective solution. So that's been identified by the Diking District. If you drive through that area right now, that slough is overflowing. Everybody in that area has got high groundwater and flooding going on right now. So, that's why I raised it early on in terms of directing stormwater into the slough. And there's so many moving parts with that issue there, as you're probably aware of, that are being dealt with, but there's a lot of moving parts there. So all I'm getting at is that, it said it's not an efficient solution or effective solution, it's been identified. I just want to make sure that it really gets nailed down in the development permit process and feel comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for this. So it's going to all happen there. These comments will get fully addressed at the DP.
Through the chair, that yes, staff has this information. We will use this information when we're receiving the development permit application and then issuing it. We'll be using and we'll also really be looking to Pemberton Valley Diking District for input at that stage. And early in the design stage, we have provided these comments directly to the proponents, so they have them right now and can start factoring that into their further design process. And I will say that there has been I guess the heights on that site has been fairly dynamic when they've been working with the Ministry of Transportation around various setback requirements and whatnot. They've been having to sort of work up and down with the levels of the, whether they could be working in the berm factors and if this is in the MOTR right of way and the highway dedication. And so there's been a lot of pieces that have been sort of being looked at on an ongoing basis. I think in general, the site can fit the proposed density, and that's really what we're looking at the zoning stage right now. If the board wishes, you could put in a resolution specific to the Pemberton Valley Diking District comments, and that these will be informing the development permit process, but that's, like I say, that's something that we would use as a technical piece anyways at the DP stage.
And does that come back to the board, or is that something that staff looks at and is satisfied with in the DP?
Yeah, so the DP, I mean, I believe this one is at the discretion of the Director of Planning. Maybe I'll let Ms. Needham confirm that. We haven't had many in Area C on this specific form and character.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I have discretionary authority up to 500 square, 500 square meters. So sorry, 5,000 square feet. So this would definitely be coming back to the board for review of the development permit. So we can certainly have this looked at that time.
Those solutions that'll be worked on between PBDD, the proponent, and yourselves, that'll come back to the board at that time.
Yes, and it'll likely be mostly through the civil engineers. The proponent civil engineers will have to work out that solution.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? It looks like we've lost Russell, but I feel like he had to go. Am I right? Did you get a note about that?
No, nothing.
Okay.
I'll move this.
Moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Crompton. Any comments? Thank you for this really in-depth. You took the comments and I'm grateful that you did that. That's awesome. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm losing.
I want one of these in Area B, please.
Area C, Wildfire Protection Development Permit Area, third reading and voting approval.
I'll move that.
Okay, moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Jones. Any comments? Or anyone opposed? Motion carries. 8.3, Furry Creek Neighborhood, OCP and zoning amendments, second reading and public hearing.
I'll move that as well.
I would like to hear from Ms. Stewart.
Yeah, that's what Nice try.
But we'll get to you. Oh, there's Russell.
Thank you. And we do have a presentation, just a brief staff presentation to help summarize the work that's been done from first reading. So we'll let
Super. Through the chair, I apologize, the clicker is still out of action, so just let me know when I can advance the slides.
Awesome, thank you. So we can advance the slide. So thank you, and just wanted to provide a bit of context because it has been some time since we came back to the board on this file. In terms of context, we did, the board gave first reading to the OCP amendment bylaw and the zoning amendment bylaw in July of 2021. And the focus of work since then has really been on the referral process, addressing referral comments, preparing legal agreements, and negotiating the voluntary financial contributions for expansion of the fire services. Next slide, please. Which is also sort of what will be the focus of this brief presentation and the staff report. A background, just so we're all on the same page for the project, the Furry Creek neighborhood comprises approximately 419 hectares of property to the north and south of Furry Creek along the Cedar Sky Highway. It includes zoned and unzoned land which have existing MOTI development approvals and 2 Section 219 land development agreements in place. It is designated planned community under the OCP, and to date, the golf course and clubhouse have been completed along with 56 condominium dwelling units on the water and 90 single family and duplex units, 4 duplex units in the uplands. So the Furry Creek Comprehensive Development 3 zone provides for up to 870 dwelling units, including a minimum of 120 non-market affordable dwelling units, up to 120 resort hotel tourist accommodation units, 2,300, just over 2,300 village commercial space, community center, administration office, childcare facilities, school site, as well as 19.1 hectares of parks, trails, and open space. And just to note that the OCP amendment bylaw is really seeking to replace the existing Fairy Creek neighborhood section with updated content and mapping, recognizing the focused planning process that has now taken place. So the designation will remain planned community. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to provide a little analysis of the board input and input from referrals and some of the actions that have come out of that. One important item that we heard from the board was around childcare facilities and access rate. And this came up from at the Furry Creek first reading in particular, but also around discussions for the Tiger Bay application. And we're really hearing that we need to be providing more space and using, more expansive design guidelines. So, and this came from the board. It also did come through some referral comments as well. Staff had the opportunity to meet with District of Squamish staff on this item, as that jurisdiction has done a lot of recent work around childcare. We haven't had the opportunity at the SLRD yet, so this is a great opportunity to build on that work. And we put forward a memo to both the Britannia and Furry Creek developers around what we're looking for in terms of commitments around childcare facilities. And Furry Creek Fine Peace has committed to a 30% access rate, which would equate to 74 spaces provided by that 500 market dwelling unit. 37 spaces will be provided with the village commercial, and this will be dedicated covenanted space and with 50% below market rent. Just wanted to touch base on the area requirements piece, because that we did get input from the board on that as well. And the area has increased. So at first reading, we were looking at 139 meters squared, and so that's increased to 390 meters squared of indoor space, and then 411 meters squared of outdoor space. And that's for the childcare facility that's going to be built in conjunction with the community center. And noting that this was input we received from the District of Squamish staff too, that we're looking to the City of Vancouver design guidelines when we're looking at the area requirements, and those are being referenced in the land development agreement. So that's the expectation that's being put forward. And so yeah, there's 37 spaces would be provided with the village commercial, and that's the 201st market dwelling unit, and then 37 by the 500 market dwelling unit. And then I'll go to the next slide, please. So another area we received important input on was around the village commercial, and just noting that we have increased, we received input from the board as well as referral comments around the potential to increase the commercial space, and it has been increased basically to 25,000 square feet, so up from 1,400 meters squared. And next slide, please. We look at the fire hall and equipment. This item hasn't really changed since first reading. These commitments have been in place. Specifically, there's the requirement for the 530 meter squared fire hall and a minimum of 3,100 meters square site. New quint with a minimum 22.7 meter ladder, and then 200,000 for auxiliary equipment, and that's specifically to fit out the quint. And that number, we worked with Protective Services to come up with that number, and it reflects the procurement process that's been underway for the Britannia Beach replacement quint, and then the equipment for that piece too. And the idea is that we really want the equipment to be the same for both quint and both fire halls, as knowing that the staff will be moving between the halls as well. Next slide, please. So the school site, that was another piece that we needed to sort of refine some of the details on in advance of second reading. There was a geotechnical report, preliminary geotechnical report explored two locations, meaning a north and a south site. The north site was identified as the preferable site from a geotechnical perspective. So that's the site that's being put forward, and the site that's shown in the site plan on the screen there. And I guess noting that a full geotechnical report will be required prior to the DP authorizing subdivision for the northeast neighborhood, but the initial report identified this site as being appropriate and viable. And the other piece here is that the commitment from the developer is to provide a ready to build and service school site. So it's a fully prepped, basically just ready to put this school down and road and whatnot going in. Next slide, please. So I'll just speak really briefly to some of the other items that were discussed by the board and also came forward through the referral comments. One was around the step code. And we have increased the step code requirements to a minimum step 4 for part 9 buildings and step 3 for part 3 buildings. The fossil-free, fuel-free community commitments are in the land development agreement, stating that no pipe natural gas services will be provided within or to any part of the lands for residential purposes. We also needed to get further details around the private shuttle service that's being provided by the developer, and noting that this service is being put in place until the BC Transit service will be available. And it provides service, basically links the TransLink service in Lions Bay to the BC Transit system in Squamish with a stop in Britannia Beach. The commitment is for at least 2 round trips per day, a $10 one-way fare, and that the service will be in place in conjunction with the first residential units and to remain in place until the BC Transit provides a regularly scheduled service to the lands. Next slide, please. Another item here around the community gardens, just refining the details here and the commitments, which are all outlined in the land development agreement. So it's a minimum of 0.15 hectares in area to be dedicated and operated by the regional district. This will provide at least 200 garden plots. And then there are requirements for soil, fencing, animal protection, water, as well as additional facilities such as the shed or any other thing that's deemed necessary by the director when we're looking to build those amenities. Also, we had the opportunity to refine the details around the shared neighborhood, electric vehicles and e-bikes. And the commitment from the developer is to provide neighborhood electric vehicle and electric bicycle sharing service for residents of Furry Creek development. And that this service will be in place in conjunction with the first residential units. And I guess just to note, both for the shared neighborhood electric vehicles and e-bikes, as well as the private shuttle service, we have the land development agreement requires a letter of credit be obtained to ensure that those are followed through on. So I believe it's 200,000 for the neighborhood electric vehicles and 100,000 for the private shuttle service in terms of the letter of credit piece. Next slide, please. So some specific comments from Vancouver Coastal Health were around the need for source water protection plans, which are required in advance of 4th reading. Also noting that the wastewater treatment plant and water treatment plant expansion lands, these are being secured via the land development agreement. So this is if it's deemed that we need more than if there's need for more space, we have the lands there to facilitate that. And there were also important comments from a healthy built environment perspective that are that were included in the development permit guidelines. Next slide, please. So Ministry of Transportation comments really focused around reconfiguration of the park and ride, identification of trailhead parking, and also the confirmation of the 1 in 10,000 geotechnical study, which is required also in advance of 4th reading. Next slide, please. BC Transit comments were, really looking at the pullouts, bus stops, pedestrian pathways, and these details have all been incorporated into the land development agreement. Next slide, please. So Squamish Nation, we I'll first speak to the referral response, which noted concerns around the Squamish Nation Siam candidate site, registered archaeological site, unprotected mature old growth, and protection of salmon habitat. And staff, Find Peace, and Squamish Nation met on January 31st, 2022 to discuss these sort of concerns and recommendations. Ultimately, it was, most of them were worked through at that meeting or subsequent sort of email correspondence. And I think the important piece here to note is that overall the Squamish Nation does not have concerns on moving the Furry Creek neighborhood OSP and zoning amendment through the bylaw process. And they confirm that the remaining concerns and recommendations can be addressed concurrently to the SLRD amendment process, and that they are being addressed at the working group level. An archaeological working group, cultural working group, and environmental working group are in place between the developer and Squamish Nation, Rights and Title, and they've had a meeting with the archaeological working group. The cultural working group is scheduled for this week, and they're still working to set up a date for the environmental working group. So just that work is underway and sort of happening simultaneously to this process. And next slide, please. Next slide, please. So just, briefly on the land development agreements, and I'm happy to take any specific questions after. The board at first reading provided direction that the land development agreement and the housing agreement were to be drafted in advance of second reading so that this information could be available also at the public hearing. So we worked really hard to get these pieces to you today. The land development agreement has details around sustainability requirements, servicing and infrastructure, fire protection, affordable housing, transportation and transit, village commercial, community center and childcare facilities, school site, parks and trails phasing, as well as the public works yard. Next slide, please. I wanted to take a moment to get into some of the details of the housing agreement, because this is sort of new information that we are presenting to the board today. And I will note too that a lot of this really reflects the work that Worcester Housing Authority is doing and has been doing, specifically around definitions and what we're looking at for rental rates and whatnot. So we have come up with a definition of eligible employee, which is sort of prioritizing, I guess, to step back. All of the affordable housing units will be employee units, and then they are prioritized. Firstly, to Furry Creek firefighters or Furry Creek early childhood educators. Then we have a Furry Creek employee, then an SLRD employee, then a municipal employee, and noting that retirees are included in that eligible employee as long as they were an eligible employee for at least 10 of the 12 years before they became retired. Wanted to note that there will be no term in this housing agreement, as the affordable housing is to be provided in perpetuity as per our policies in the RGS and Area D OCP. Rent rates, we're looking at 30% of housing income limits as applicable to the affordable rental unit at the time the tenancy agreement is entered into. And housing income limits, so we're all on the same page here, means that the maximum gross household income for eligibility in affordable housing programs in the planning area Lower Mainland Squamish, as determined from time to time. And we can get into some of those details if the board has further questions on that. And noting that the affordable sale price means 80% of the fair market value of affordable ownership. And I wanted to, next slide, please. Just circle back, because this was important input that the board provided at first reading, as well as we wanted some more certainty around the diversity in unit type, as well as integration throughout the neighborhood. And so these commitments are in the housing agreement. We have, and this diversity in unit type applies to both the affordable rental and affordable ownership units. There's a maximum of 6 studio-sized dwelling units between 15 and 18 1-bedroom units between 24 and 27, 2-bedroom units, and between 12 and 15, 3-bedroom units. So we're really trying to strike that diversity in units and setting that requirement in the housing agreement. And then in terms of integration, there's a commitment that the affordable dwelling units be located within at least 3 of the neighborhood areas. So next slide, please. And next slide, please. Oh, that's a bit hard to see, but I can speak to this, and it's also in your in the board report as well. But if we're wanted to provide a high-level overview of the amenity zoning and covenant installments, the approach and rationale, and so we're looking at years 3 to 6, so a total of I guess what we're I'm trying to think of the best way to paraphrase this, but we're going to be so the amenity zoning covenant installments will be split between the developers, and will be based on development rights, and it will also be triggered by units. We have 100 units. Basically, every 100 units, 1,284 will be required per unit. So if we're looking at the total contributions, we'll be requiring years 1 to 3 in upfront and years 3 to 6 in installments. So it equates to about 1.3 million in both upfront and amenity installments. And I want to highlight that we're looking at the market units, and we're looking at the residential units. And the total numbers that were presented in the David Mitchell and Associates report around what we need to be securing for that expansion funding, we have the same a dollar amount is being used. We're just bringing it over all the residential units. We can't factor in the tourist accommodation or the commercial units. Our legal advice has said that those we can't be using. We can basically just use the residential units, as this is really to do with density bonusing. So we went back to just looking at the market dwelling units. So we have 650 market dwelling units for both Furry Creek and Britannia South. And we also are looking at doing years 3 to 6 for the amenity zoning, and then years 1 to 2 for the upfront CACs. So we have increased the amount being required upfront, and we have, and then the remainder is for the is being covered off in the amenity zoning, the covenant installments. And we also are setting the trigger at 100 units rather. And I'll go for the next slide, please. And then if we look here at the upfront, basically we're asking for years 1 and 2 of the budget that was put forward by the David Mitchell and Associates group. And that is being split once again by the 1650 units, which is both the Furry Creek and Britannia South developments combined. So Furry Creek will be providing 400, just over 400,000, and Britannia South closer to 500,000 in the upfront CAC, and this is required at bylaw adoption. And so the thinking here is that we have year 1 and year 2, we're getting that we have negotiated a higher upfront CIC amount so we can help transition the fire department right at the get-go. And then we have also set the development triggers at 100 units so that the funding is coming forward on a more ongoing basis. And so at full build out for Furry Creek, the amenity installments would be 936,000 and the upfront CAC is 400,500. This is for in addition to the fire hall and whatnot. So next slide, actually, this provides a better summary. There we go. That's what I was just speaking to. And this is all set at or expressed in 2022 dollars, and so it'll be adjusted at the time of payment based on the consumer price index. And I think they're just reiterating again the numbers are factoring in residential dwelling units only into the unit calculations for the upfront and installments. Noting though that the full dollar amount ask is the same, we're just only setting the triggers based on the residential dwelling units. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. So I'll just touch on the recommendations that are being put forward here in the staff report. Really, we're looking for recommending second reading for the zoning bylaw, the OCP amendment bylaw, and recommending that the board direct staff to schedule and advertise a public hearing to be held in person. Next slide, please. These are speaking to the requirements that will be, they're being carried forward and will be required in advance of bylaw adoption. And so one is for the 1 in 10,000 geotechnical hazard study. That's an MOTI requirement. And we also have the requirement for the source water protection plan, the land development agreement and housing agreement that would be provided in registrable form prior to bylaw adoption, and the cash funds amount that would be required at bylaw adoption as well. And I'll leave it there and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Questions? I don't see any questions.
Can I move it now?
Oh, there's lots of questions.
Did you want to ask a question, Director Rickman?
Yeah, I think I'll go first. I'll start with one quick question on the e-bikes and cars are secured through the land development agreement. And how do they speak to like ongoing maintenance and replacement? Are they still there in 20 years, 30 years? How does that work?
And that's it. Those are good questions. The developers committed to basically providing the service, and that commitment is in the land development agreement. And they have the letter of credit basically to ensure that the service is in place. We don't have a timeline on that service and whether that's something that we want to put into land development agreement, or we just want to ensure that that is in place sort of in perpetuity. I don't know what's realistic. It's been a really hard one to try and sort of think through all the details and what's relevant at a zoning through a rezoning process, and what's gonna what our alternate modes and neighborhood modes of transportation may look different in 20 years. And so we've really been grappling with, what type of detail how much detail do we put in the land development agreement? I think we really want to make sure that we have some neighborhood systems in place right when the new residents are moving in, so that can start creating that mode shift right away. And then I think the developer has made a commitment to putting that service in. If we want to have a time frame, that's something that we could integrate into the land development agreement, or we could leave it a little bit more open-ended as it is now.
And they would manage the administration?
That's correct, yeah.
I mean, when we look at making, offering these opportunities through developments, I always like to make sure they're secured through time. I agree with you to say that this is the right solution 30 years from now might be a little weird. So to offer in perpetuity might be a little bit challenging. But I feel like there should be some language, if not, I guess, within the land development agreement that ensures the continued provision of electric vehicles and e-bikes or something similar to, or whatever that is in 20 years or 50 years. And so like you say, it's hard to put words to that, but I just would like to make sure that the commitment to provide these alternative transportation options are carried through in perpetuity. Might not be the same solution, but that solutions are being provided by the government. That makes sense? A couple of thoughts, but I'll wait.
Okay. Were there any other questions before we make the motion? Go ahead, Director Elliott and then Director Stoner.
One of the changes that's changed from first reading is the removal of resort hotel and a change to residential mid-rise tourist accommodation. I'm not clear what that means or why the change has been made.
Yes, thank you. So through the chair, this change was at the request of the developer, and they were really seeking to have more flexibility in terms of what those tourist accommodation units look like. It may look like a hotel, it may not look like a hotel, and it's really trying to figure out, what is going to feel best for the community and what's going to, whether it is more ideal to have an integration of tourist accommodation and just residential units, or whether we just want to have your standard typical 100-unit hotel. This provides the flexibility for that. And the building height doesn't change. The total number of tourist accommodation units doesn't change. It's just removing this specific requirement or specific designation of resort hotel, and really the tourist accommodation units can have a different look or feel depending.
Throughout the staff report, it talks about in some areas that they're providing 120 non-market affordable dwelling units and 60 are residential rental that might come in a number of different forms, including shared living accommodation.
So to clarify, through the chair, the 60 affordable rental, those are two different things. So the 60 affordable rental units are being provided. Those are will be basically employee units. The developer is also envisioning that there will be other ways of supporting affordability in terms of housing. It wouldn't be these non-market units that are being secured through the housing agreement. It would just be, whether they have, whether it's the lock-off suites or whether, I'm trying to think some of the other ideas that are being put forward, but basically they're thinking creatively about what the built form looks like to support affordability at Furry Creek.
So I'm just trying to figure out where all these numbers fit. There's 750 market dwelling units, and then it says 120 non-market affordable dwelling units. Those could be for sale.
So there's 60, yeah. So 60 are committed as rental and 60 are committed as ownership.
Okay. The other thing, the school land is not within the boundaries of Furry Creek. So how do they make a commitment on land that's not within their development boundary?
Yes, thank you. So through the chair, the lands are crown lands adjacent to Furry Creek, and we will be working together to get the tenure for those lands. They, I think if that site ultimately the Crown doesn't want to put forward that site, then they'll have to be providing the site within their boundaries, within the private land. I think that typically we like to see schools on Crown land, so that's something that we expect. We didn't receive any input from School District 48 on any of this. That's a bit challenging, but this site has been contemplated for a school site since the beginning. So I think we'll see sort of what happens in the future, but that obligation is there for the developer to find a school site. And that's their preferred site. If that isn't viable because the Crown doesn't find it viable, or because the geotechnical report doesn't find it viable, we'll be finding a different site for a school.
That school site walkable, it's sort of tucked up, I think, quite high on the benchlands. And so when we think about situating a school in a complete community, is this school walkable to the majority of students? I mean, I imagine it's an elementary school. So how has that been assessed?
Yeah, so through the chair, I believe the idea, and like I said, it would be really up to the School District 48, but that this would actually be a secondary school and the elementary school would be in Britannia Beach. So there's going to be kids busing just because we are going to have a school in each community, but
we haven't heard from SB 48.
That's correct.
So we're making that up.
I mean, I can't speak to the discussions that have been had at Britannia Beach around the elementary school, and perhaps I'll let Ms. Needham provide context on the plans for the school at Britannia Beach. But it is envisioned that this would likely be a secondary school site.
Can I just make a comment about the school situation?
No, I have more questions.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to come back to the school in a minute.
Did Ms. Needham have more information?
Yeah, through the chair, thank you. There is a school proposed, as you know, for the lands at Britannia Beach South, also known as the Tiger Bay lands. That would be for a elementary school, and there's also a daycare plan for that site. So it would be at the school board's discretion how they wish to use the site at Furry Creek. But as Ms. Dewar said, we've had very little input from the school board. We have tried to reach out to them, and for whatever reason, they don't get back to us. So we are reserving the site on the piece of Crown land, and it will be up to the school board if they wish to utilize that.
My other question, Ms. Dewar, is about the trails and the paths through the development. A lot of the sections show some narrow paths, and they're all sort of pedestrian oriented, and I couldn't figure out how bikes are moving or if bikes are contemplated to move. Some of them are they're less than 2 meters wide. Many of them are gravel. So how is that being contemplated when we think about like an e-bike program to help move people from top to the bottom and east-west?
Yes, thank you. So through the chair, we do have the information was put forward around the parks, trails and open space phasing. So just to step back, that they will be dedicated at the subdivision with when we have at time of subdivision, will be like all the trails will be and parks will be dedicated. And in terms of I think that's actually a little bit separate from active transportation corridors, which will be taking place more in the roadways, and that is more it's in the discretion of MOTI, and they'll be working on active transportation corridors there. Those aren't our roads, so we're looking at securing sort of recreational trails throughout Furry Creek neighborhood, which can be used for all sorts of different types of users. As you have pointed out, though, Director Elliott, that might not be the commuter route, and you would need to be exploring the integration of bike lanes within the actual road system at the time that the roads are put in place. And we're we are challenged a little bit at the regional district level in that we don't have jurisdiction over the roads.
I'm trying to figure out, you know, if we think about design principles of building our infrastructure for our citizens that are 8 and our citizens that are 80, and we don't have any control over the roads, but we do over pathways, but we're not really building active transportation in the trail system that I can see, aside from more pedestrian oriented. How do we contemplate that if we have no influence over the roads? Because basically we can't say we want separated bike lanes. We can't say we need the bike lanes to be this wide. And so we're leaving it up to hopefully MOTI, which has a 30% mode shift goal by 2030. But no influence. So I'm really wrestling with the fact that our trail system isn't capturing that.
Yeah, no, through the chair, those are very valid points. We are also sort of grappling with that as well at a staff level. The sort of the parks, trails, and open space, those are really rec amenities that we're talking about. That's not necessarily, you know, we don't necessarily have the active transportation lens on when we're looking at those specific amenities. The active transportation corridors, we can work with MOTI at time of subdivision to try and advance that work. And, you know, I will say, I think like we are seeing the Ministry of Transportation staff asking for this infrastructure as well. And there were comments around, you know, snow clearing and all these pieces that are would have to be contemplated when you look at active transportation infrastructure within the roadway system. But
do we know how wide our road right of way are throughout the development?
Ooh, I don't have, through the chair, I don't have that off the top of my head. But we do have, I guess, when we look at the subdivision process and the subdivision stage and DP stage, we do have, you know, clear strategic directions in our regional growth strategy, as well as our official community plans around, you know, the desire for active transportation. So we can be working, you know, with the proponent and with MOTI when we get sort of to that subdivision, those DP subdivision stages.
Okay. Another question is saving the geotech report for adoption versus third reading, because if the geotech report changes anything or influences the density in a particular area, wouldn't we want to know about that at third reading versus adoption?
Thank you. So through the chair, this is the 1 in 10,000 geotechnical hazard study. So that's a really big report. It's underway, or the proponent has sort of stated that it's underway and likely will be done in advance of fourth reading, or will be done in advance of fourth reading, but will likely be done, you know, this summer, completed this summer. So we will bring that forward, you know, as soon as possible. If the board would like to see that at third reading, that's absolutely something that we can do and put forward. We can change that recommendation to have it come at third reading. You know, it's a Ministry of Transportation requirement, so they're likely not going to approve. So at third reading, we have sort of third reading, then MOTI approval. They won't be approving the bylaw until they have that hazard study complete anyways. So it's likely to be taken care of through that process.
Given the developer's timeline, we wouldn't be holding them up or adding to the timeline to say it could be available at third, because it's already underway.
Yep.
I have lots of questions about the fire service, but me and my colleague will ask some of those. But the last thing I wanted to contemplate is that both this development and the Britannia South development have an impact regionally on facilities in Squamish, which are undersized for the current population of Squamish. So there's no requirement in the land development agreement or anywhere in here that a service area establishment to contribute to amenities or a CAC contribution is missing. And we know that residents in this area will access Squamish. I see Director Rainbow quite frequently in Squamish. And
You'll see less of me in the future.
but I think that's something that we have to contemplate, is that the community center is 5,000 square feet, which is about the size of a very large single-family home, and there won't be a large format grocery store, I don't think, in the commercial area, given the size of that. There's not an ice rink, there's not a swimming pool, so I just would like to see that contemplated at some point about what is fair and how do we work that in without necessarily holding up the development, but making sure we're contemplating the regional impacts of all these new people on facilities that are undersized as they are right now. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I have a speakers list. I have Director Stoner and then Director Rainbow, then Director Burke-Jones. But we do, sorry, I am going to interrupt myself for 1 second. We have 10 minutes to start the Regional Hospital District meeting. So we may have to shelve this. So if we want to ask questions, but we'll have to come back to this because I don't think we're going to be done in 9 minutes. Go ahead.
We
open
the
it and
regional
recess
district meeting and then recess it?
That's probably the best thing to do, yeah. Okay, we'll do that.
So what are we doing?
We're gonna recess this open meeting. We're gonna open the Regional Hospital District meeting and then we'll recess that and then we'll come back to this and finish this conversation. So it's a little bit of administrative juggling, but it'll just take 2 minutes. Sorry? So it'll just take 2 minutes. Yeah.
Just a couple of minutes.
Just 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm imposing a recess on this meeting. Stick around. You're not done yet. And then I will call to order this Cedar Sky Regional Hospital District. Just stay here. Area A, Area B, stay here. We'll call this meeting to order and recognize that collectively we are on the unceded territories of all the First Nations within our regional boundaries. And I will call a recess to this meeting. Is everyone good on that? Okay. Everyone good? Good. Okay. I'll reopen the public meeting of the board. Carry on, Director Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, thanks so much, Ms. Stewart, for the presentation. I think it's really helpful for applications this large to have the refresher when it's been a year since we've seen it last. A few questions. Was happy to see the requirement around the smaller single-family home dwellings, although then it made me look at what the gross floor area was of the regular family homes, and I'm just curious. So they're at 465 meters squared with 5 of them, with the ability of 5 of them to be 700 meters squared. I'm just wondering where those guidelines came from in terms of square footage of a single family home.
Excellent, thank you. So through the chair, those state lots or founders lots, so I guess from the outset of this vision for the community, there was always the idea that there would be these large lots reserved for owners or whatever. It was requested that we have the ability for a handful of lots to have a larger gross floor area than we would typically set for a single family dwelling. We have that 400 and so is the standard in area D for single family dwellings, and so we have brought that in. And then there was the request to have the ability for some lots to be have larger homes. That's sort of the story. There's much more to say.
Sorry, was it 700? Is that what you're referencing?
7,500 square feet. 700 meters squared.
Wow.
And so I guess that came to my other question, which is around the community center sizing, which is half of that of an estate lot. And so I'm curious how we landed on that square footage of a community center at 4,000 square feet when we're allowing 7,500 square foot homes.
So through the chair, the size for the community center has been, I guess, has been set from the existing covenants, and that is being carried forward into the zoning, and that's where that number is from. There is opportunity for change to either of those items, and that's something that if the board wishes to see, that should be done and needs to be done in advance of the public hearing. So just to bear that in mind, but we're happy to look at those aspects of the zoning bylaw.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification on process. My other question was with regards to the childcare space. And I'm curious if there was any consideration of that space being leased to a nonprofit operator or giving nonprofit operators first right of refusal.
Thank you. So through the chair, I think that is the intention and the sort of hopeful vision. If there was not a nonprofit who wanted to take that on, then the developer would have to step in. But that's the idea, yes. And that's where the 50% below market rents would be applicable to that nonprofit provider.
Okay, fantastic. And then I have another question around the definition of eligible employees for the affordable housing. And where it says for a Creek employee, SLRD employee, or municipal employee, is that like an employee of the SLRD, or is that anybody who is employed in the region?
Thank you. So through the chair, it's both. So there's a definition for each of those specific sort of categories, and it basically states you either are employee of the SLRD or of the actual municipality, say the District of Squamish or the SLRD, or you are an employee of a business that's within one of those jurisdictions.
And then in your presentation, you spoke a little bit to the rent rates and the housing income, and I'm just wondering if you can dive in a little bit deeper into details there. As I read it, it means that we're setting rent rates based on the individual gross median income of whoever's living there, or is it based on the median income of the region?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, let me just pull up that section of the housing agreement. We have specific numbers that are helpful. Okay, so, and this is specific to the affordable rental units, and so the rent charge under the tenancy agreement that the owner enters into must not exceed 30% of the housing income limits as applicable to that affordable rental unit at the time the tenancy agreement is entered into. By way of illustration, as of the date of this agreement, the housing income limit for Squamish, British Columbia are. So basically, this is trying to set a cap. And so for a one-bedroom studio, 52,500 for one bedroom or studio unit, such that the total annual rent permitted under this agreement for a studio or one bedroom unit that was rented as of the day of this agreement would not exceed 30% of that 52,500. And then there's examples for a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and for illustrative purposes, the 4-bedroom unit could not exceed 30% of 92,000.
That's based off the median income. That's helpful. And then my last question for now was around the fire component. In this, we talk about like the House Sound East fire service and it being dependent on both the Britannia South development and the Furry Creek development going forward in order to support the full development of that fire protector services. But what happens if one of them doesn't go ahead, or they don't go ahead in tandem, where we're looking for that upfront cost to cover training of our firefighters and bring them up to a level that will be able to respond to the tall buildings? How do we fill that gap if one of these don't go ahead?
Thank you. So through the chair, the idea behind having, basically we want both developers to be held to the same standard to contribute to the expansion of fire protection services. That's the initial premise of having all the development units between Britannia South and Freight Creek sort of calculated together. We have 650 units potentially proposed between both developments. This is how much, you know, if both developments were going to go ahead. There's the full numbers. Yeah, so and basically we've got this full budget and the full which was factoring in both developments happening, and that was the work done by Dave Mitchell and Associates. And then we have a set amount of market dwelling units that were you know, basically that number was divided by the number of market dwelling units. The thinking from staff's perspective is that if one of the developments were to not move forward, then there would be a reduced, you wouldn't need as big of a budget. We wouldn't need as many firefighters. We wouldn't need, you know, the operations would be potentially half or approximately half. We have the infrastructure already being provided for and committed to. And so this piece is really looking at that operations piece. And the thinking is that if one development doesn't move forward, the operations would be also reduced. And so and then we did look to address the need for more ongoing funding by setting the trigger at 100 units rather than 200 units. And we also looked at front loading the financial asks as well. So those are sort of two pieces that we brought in to try and address that concern.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Okay, thank you. Director Rainbow, questions?
Does that just have to be questions?
It has to be questions right now. You can come back with comments. So.
I'm just trying to see if I can. No, I guess I'm just going to make some comments.
Okay, Director Birch-Jones, questions?
Jenna covered every single one of my questions.
Fantastic.
I have a comment about the bird-friendly windows, but we'll get there, right?
Are there any other questions before we go ahead?
The referral letter from Squamish on the size of the Quint ladder truck. The referral said that would be undersized for the height of the buildings being contemplated, but did that change?
Yes, so thank you through the chair. The Quint specifications were sort of vetted through the Dave Mitchell and Associates group, who had sort of been the third party providing input to SLRD staff, as well as the Britannia Beach Fire Chief. And the Fine Piece has their own set of consultants as well. So those numbers and requirements are sort of what expertise, like those are the experts that we're looking to. I'm not sure where the District of Squamish staff is coming from on that.
Okay. One of the questions that is, if I lived in Furry Creek and I've got so many amenities today, and my taxes cover some of those amenities, but now I'm going to be part of a much larger development and a higher operational cost, because we're talking about many more kilometers of trails and roads and a community center. And so needing to put reserves away for that, a fire hall and reserves for replenishing trucks that just at a minimum cost $1 million or more. Have we done an analysis for this community about what their future looks like? Are these operational costs, have we figured them out, and does that fit within the number of units and people being added who are paying taxes, or can people expect their taxes to go up? I mean, right now everything looks like a good news story, but actually when you have to take care of a water treatment plant and an expanded wastewater treatment plant and roads and trails and a fire hall and a public works yard, which you don't really have now. What do we say to people that are in these sort of master plan communities?
Thank you. So through the chair, there was a fiscal impact analysis completed that was submitted with the development application. And the most significant gap was really around the fire protection services, which we have been working to address. And that gap was really felt to be in the first, say 5 years was the sort of piece that we're trying to bridge. And then the fiscal impact analysis is shows that once the additional taxpayers come on, it works, I guess. And if anything, it's showing that it might lessen the burden. Right now, the existing residents, they are contributing to the service area, and we have, I guess we'll also see commercial space coming on, which will be contributing as well. So as the community sees more development, the sort of tax piece will shift. I think the existing residents are excited to see more amenities, and with that, there are costs.
Does Area D zoning address cannabis use in commercial retail, or are we allowing that in this zone?
Thank you. So through the chair, cannabis retail requires, I believe I'd have to double check because it's been some time since I've looked at those provisions, but I believe we require site-specific zoning, rezoning throughout the regional district so that we can really contemplate on each specific location what's going to make sense.
I'm just wondering, since we're doing the rezoning, whether we're contemplating that use.
I would have to look at the area D zoning on that piece.
And will any of the parks created have irrigation and lighting included? And what about the walkways? So the ones that are to help move people around, will there be lighting on any of them, or?
Yeah, so through the chair, there is an intention to have some of the parks lit and washroom facilities and irrigation. Some of them are going to be more naturalized parks, so there will be a balance throughout the community.
In terms of active transportation and people walking, will be kind of like a headlamp adventure after dark, or will we have lighting on some of the paths?
I'm anticipating that we've already spoken about having the paths, like the pedestrian crossings and underpasses, those all to be lit, and that's connecting basically the north and south and sort of connecting people to the waterfront area. I anticipate that some of the trails in the north that are more recreation oriented may not be lit, but I don't know that I have all those types of details.
Thank you.
Director Richmond, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, 2 quick questions. The private shuttle, that's southbound only? Or does it go to Squamish as well?
Through the chair, both northbound and southbound.
And that is, they're committed to provide that until such time as a regional transit system is in place, that commitment?
That is correct, yes.
Sweet.
And the second thing is just listening to some of the conversation, thinking it might be an attractive spot for short-term overnight rentals. Is that protected through the Area D zoning bylaw, or is there any contemplation for tightening that up or ways to prevent that from happening? Because it could be an attractive area for that, right?
Yes, thank you. So through the chair, we do have in our zoning bylaw that short-term rentals are not permitted as of right, basically. I think the idea is that those 120 tourist accommodation units would provide for that short-term nightly rental, and people would know that, if you're moving in, these units are designated for tourist accommodation. So I think that's trying to address that, understanding that there may be a desire for people to access the community from a resort perspective, but that also that the full-time residents know what their sort of buying into at the beginning. So we don't see, those 120 units are envisioned potentially for short-term rentals or any type of tourist accommodation, but otherwise nightly rentals are not supported.
And that's regulated and enforced through the zoning bylaw, and there's no other further regulation or enforcement through the land use agreement or anything like that.
No.
I have a question. I think it's great to see that they are looking at a diversity of housing through the continuum of housing, and that is certainly laid out here. My concern is the ongoing administrative burden of maintaining that covenant that certain employees are eligible for these units and who is following up on those in the absence of a housing authority or some kind of nonprofit. Whoever is going to manage these, the obviously in the rental units, you have greater control because you know who your tenants are. As homes are changed over, that covenant is obviously transferred to the next owner, but who is checking that eligibility and maintaining that eligibility to live in those units long term?
Yes, thank you. So through the chair, there have been preliminary discussions with the developer, has had preliminary discussions with Sea to Sky Community Services around the potential to manage the affordable housing units at Furry Creek. That is one option. Otherwise, it will be the SLRD who is managing those units until there is some sort of regional housing authority or some sort of other system in place. And I guess to add to that, staff are aware of that issue, and we're sort of in a tricky place where we're trying to secure affordable housing based on our policies and strategic directions and community needs, and also recognizing that we don't have that regional housing authority in place. So I think there's a hope that at one point we will in the future, and in the meantime, it'll be for the SLRD to manage or the nonprofit organization.
Okay. Go ahead, Director Stoner. We're on questions about Furry Creek.
Thank you. Through the chair, on the affordable housing piece, have we discussed at all the opportunity to secure any of the units fee simple from the developer? So one of the components that we're talking about when we talk about the cost of running a housing society is actually trying to generate a revenue stream to be able to have an executive director of that housing society and what that looks like in the long term. And so does the developer just maintain ownership of all of these units and get the rental and sale income from them? Or is there some way that we can secure those as fee simple to the regional district?
I'm not sure if Director Needham has any sort of thing to add. We haven't had discussions around the regional district taking on that role. I'm not sure if there's a bigger picture piece, Director Needham, that you have any input on there.
Yeah, through the chair, we haven't negotiated fee simple units. The thought was, as Ms. Dewar said, that we would either have a nonprofit manage the units, or we would have to probably have complementary staffing within the SLRD to manage the units, have a staff member assigned to cover off that. We don't see it as being a huge challenge. We think that through checklists and systems that these can be managed fairly easily. But it's highly likely that either the developer or nonprofit will end up doing the management with oversight from the SLRD. But as Ms. Dewar said, we would love nothing more than to have a regional housing authority. And yeah, our hopes would be that can someday happen. And it'd be nice if all of the municipalities could utilize those services. But until then, we have to make do with what we've got. Thanks.
Question, Director Stone.
Yeah, I guess, how do we cover who covers the cost for Sea to Sky Community Services to manage the units? Does that come out of the rent? Does that come out? Who Like, what does that look like? And I appreciate that it doesn't seem like it'll be a huge amount of staff time, but we are collecting more of these. And eventually it'll become more and more staff time. And so I'm just curious if we give some, how do we give some thought to ensuring that we're earmarking some resources to cover that cost?
I think that's a question that needs to be contemplated. And it's super important, but I don't know that it's necessarily captured in this component of the bylaw. Go ahead.
So I think one of the first things the next group of people that sit around this table should do is have a set of meetings about establishing a regional housing authority. How would these units find their way into that, were that to be developed? Is there clarity about if this is developed, then they will be put into the program?
Thank you. So through the chair, that is the intention, and we might have to take that back to our legal counsel to see if we need specific wording in the housing agreement to enable that. So we'll take that back. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a super good point, because there are covenants that exist on properties that haven't changed over with old language, and therefore it kind of changes the intent of the covenant when that institution is no longer active. So if there's triggering language that can be found, that would be super helpful. Thank you. Okay, so I think we've done all the questions. I'm sure there's still lots more, but let's move on. Would someone like to make the motion?
Yes. Well, I'm just going to get some clarification here from Kristen. How would you like to package it?
Thank you. If we could do the reading, the first three as one set.
Okay.
And then the next three as one set. And then the authority to sign documentation on its own, and then the last one.
Okay, so Director Rainbow's moving the first three. Seconded by Director Demare. Any further comments? Did you want to make your comments now, Director Rainbow?
No, I don't think I need to at the moment.
Okay. I'll call the question. Okay, go ahead.
This is on second reading?
Yeah.
I will not be supporting second reading. I think that there were a number of questions that came forward that need staff consideration. Before I would entertain third reading at this time, I would just like clarification on that. And so I think we do better to send this back to staff for fine tuning on those components. Some things that I heard were regards to the size of the community center, the size of the estate lots, concerns around the firefighting component, some review of the affordable housing agreement language, as well as consideration around active transportation corridors and how we're integrating that into the trail paths. So I would like to see some of that come forward to the board before it went to public hearing.
Then I will make some comments.
Okay.
There are a number of comments. So if I take fire protection to start with, we already have an active fire department at Britannia Beach. So this is not starting some fire protection from nothing. It's building on a very well-established and efficient foundation. And the work that's gone into what you see in front of you now about fire protection has come from Mitchell & Associates, which is the SLRD hired, input from the existing fire department and Fire Chief Nichols, and also from the consultant that Fine Peace hired. Ferry Creek residents have had a lot to say about this from the time when Fine Peace took over. One of the first things they did was had a community meeting and laid out what they thought their plans would be and asked the community's input. And there was a lot of input. And as a result of that, they made some changes so that there was a very positive relationship right from the start. And they've been very honest about the way that we had to find this bridge of financing. When everything's built out, the result of the sort of the increased fire protection will be lower taxes, and it will also be lower insurance. But right now in Furry Creek, our fire hall is too far away. It's more than 10 kilometers away. So our insurance rates are higher than they are in Britannia Beach. The minute that fire hall is built in Furry Creek, the rates will come down. You know, so there are some really positive things happening there. And I don't think I haven't met anybody that has any concerns about fire protection in Furry Creek. And the kind of detail we're getting into now, the length of the ladder on the quint doesn't matter. You're not going to get a ladder that necessarily goes to the top of the highest building. It probably will in Furry Creek. But if you've got a 20-story building or a 30-story building, you don't have a 30-story ladder on a fire truck. There's other ways of dealing with that. So I think we're getting into some things here, some detail with regard to fire protection that we need to stay away from. It's not our business. We're not experts. We just leave it to the experts to deal with. I have a concern about this process we're into right now. It's kind of a bit like a death by 1,000 cuts. And one thing we should be aware of, what I don't want to get right now is a call, by the way, saying we'd like to pull that application. We don't want to rezone. There's already zoning in Furry Creek. They've already got approval to build, what, 56 or 190 odd townhouses south of the creek. They've got approval, they've got zoning for single family homes all the way up Furry Creek Drive and Stonegate and round in behind the golf course. They've got approval for a 300-room hotel. They've got approval for a marina. If they wanted to, they could go ahead and do all that and say, forget all this nonsense. We gain from this, the community of Furry Creek, the region of the Squamish Regional District gains from the kinds of proposals they brought forward here. And now we're picking at it little by little. And it worries me that we're looking at delaying this even further. Trails. The trail plan that Find Peace have brought forward basically came from the community. There are two guys that sort of are really active in building trails in the community. And they went to Find Peace and they said, here's our vision of what the Furry Creek trails would be. And Find Peace took that on and said, yeah, okay, if that's what the community wants, yes, we'll build that into our plan. And now we're saying, oh, are they going to be lit? Are they going to be this wide? Are they going to be that wide? We need to stay out of that. We need to just leave that to the community. If they want a trail that's going to be lit, like right now, for example, there are three tunnels, but two that Find Peace own that go under the highway. They have voluntarily invited the community to use those trails, use those tunnels, so that you can have a loop that goes around and you can go from the southern part of south of the highway, you can cross the highway safely through one of their tunnels and do your little loop and go back. You can do that at night if you want to. The tunnels are lit. The rest of it's not, but the tunnels are. So, we're worried about whether you can ride bikes on the trail. These are not bike trails, they're pedestrian trails. And if people want to ride bikes, and we have some people in our community that ride trail bikes, not many, but there are some. And there are plenty of trails to ride their bikes on. If you want to ride a bike to get from A to B in the community, do it on the road. Nothing wrong with the roads. It's not the highway. We're not suggesting people take their life in their hands and ride along the highway. They're community roads. There's no problem with riding your bike up the hill and along the different roads that exist right now, or along the roads that will be built. We had a comment about electric vehicles and so on. That wasn't something we said to the developer, you have to provide this for us. They voluntarily suggested that that's the sort of thing they wanted in the community. And that came about in part from discussions with people in the community. When they held their discussion sessions, which were not just sort of a 2 hours one evening, the weekend, I think it's called a charrette, isn't it? And ideas were floated, and the community said, yeah, but what if, let's do this, let's do that. And that kind of discussion has resulted in the kind of thing that we're seeing now in front of us. I'd hate to put anything in there about electric cars, because they might not last very long. The huge damage to the environment. We like to think of, well, I don't use any gas when I drive the car, but what does it take in terms of minerals and so on that have to be mined to actually produce that car? So we may be looking at vehicles in the future which are, there's no electricity to them at all. They're run by other, or certainly not the kind of electricity we use at the moment. So we need to stay away from any language around the kind of vehicles and the kind of transportation we need in the future. School, I don't think we should waste any time at all talking about schools, because the decision about schools is going to come from the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Education are not going to look at anything, any kind of proposal at all, until they've got enough kids to occupy a school. And that's going to take a long time. And they're not going to come and discuss that with us. They'll work through their school district, and we will find out that this is where a school is going to be. So I think we should just forget about that. If the Ministry of Education wanted to say right now, we want a school in that particular site, and I think what Fine Peace is saying here with their agreement in this and in the map there, yeah, is that the best school site? I'm not sure if it is or not. It would depend what kind of school it was. A secondary school, it wouldn't matter, because the secondary school, those kids are either going to be bused from Squamish. Some of them will be bused from Squamish because Squamish hasn't got a big enough school for its own population. Or are they going to build more schools there? Who knows? I mean, we just don't know about schools, and it's not worth spending any time on it. We look at, I'd hate to delay this because we're considering doing some cost centres for Area D residents to support Squamish, or facilities in Squamish. I'd have to say to you right now that I would think that at least half the people in Furry Creek don't go to Squamish. They go to West Vancouver. The doctor's down there, the dentist is down there. They go to Caulfield, Safeway, or Fresh Street Market for their groceries. They don't go to Squamish. They don't use the Squamish Library. They really resist having to pay for the construction of the Squamish pool. And when the market is built in Britannia, and it's under construction right now, it will likely be operating next year. I made my comment just now, you won't see them in Squamish much more. You won't, because if I can go to the grocery store in Britannia Beach, that's where I'm going. I'm not going to drive to Squamish. And that will be true for a lot of people. It'll get some cars off the road, and it will guarantee that the commercial area in Britannia Beach, Furry Creek, is a viable commercial area. Complement each other, regardless of what happens at South Britannia. As that develops, then that will whatever. I think there are a lot of people in Furry Creek and Britannia Beach right now that can't wait for incorporation, so they don't have to deal with the SLRD, and that's coming as well. 78 new townhouses under construction right now in Britannia Beach. The commercial centre, as I said, will be open probably by next summer. As Furry Creek develops, you're going to get a critical mass of people, and it will get to the point where it doesn't make any sense to remain in the region as unincorporated in the regional district, and it will become incorporated. And then we won't have any of these discussions, because people will be making their, as they do in the existing municipalities. Now, I read through this, and yeah, there's some detail that needs to be taken care of. And nobody's mentioned today about the trail from Furry Creek to Britannia Beach. You know, that's a viable trail. And if, as that's developed, that will be for hiking, for biking, no motorized vehicles, or maybe electric bikes, but nothing more than that. But that's not a detail that's been included in the report, but it's something that's going to be a natural outflow of the kind of trail system that's going to be developed in Furry Creek. So I would really like to see us move ahead get the second reading out of the way. I'd invite you all to come to the public hearing, sit there, listen to what the community says. You know, we're speaking on their behalf right now. We're worried about this width of this and the size of that and whether there's going to be a light here and a light there and things like that. Let the community worry about that. Let them deal with Fine Piece about some of those things. You know, Fine Piece has shown since they came to the community that they're prepared to sit down and listen. They're prepared to do things. And we have a community-built trail through the woods that it was necessary to walk about 50 yards of the golf cart path to connect with the beach trail. And we took the Fine Piece people down there and said, look, this is not good for you, it's not good for us. And they came up with the money to build a path along the side, put a fence there to separate it from. They've demonstrated that that's the kind of thing they do, the kind of work that they do in the community too. They ask people, what do you need? And then they do it. And you know, the idea of going to go back to cost centers to support facilities in surrounding municipalities. Yeah, if we do it for Squamish, we're going to do it for West Vancouver as well. We're going to do it for Whistler as well, because quite a lot of people, actually probably a lot of our residents go up to Whistler. And does that mean that I can rely in the future on Squamish giving me some money? You know, we have a beach, public beach, did a survey last year, 78% of the people on that beach were from Squamish. Nobody was from Furry Creek. When we asked them about the facilities there, they loved it. They liked the cleanliness of it, which is down to volunteers that go and pick up after people. They love the fact that there are some toilets there now, paid for by Area D, used by Squamish residents coming to use enjoy the beach. We have a really nice viewing platform at the end of the spit at Oliver's Landing. 60-something%, like the same day we did the survey on the beach, 60-something%.
Yeah. I thought that there was 5-minute speakers rule and then you can come back at the end if you still have further comments.
Well, I'll pause for 30 seconds and I'll keep going because I think you have plenty to say.
I would like to get to some other speakers that haven't had a chance to
trying to help as vice chair to just maybe get us back on track into a little more efficient meeting.
Thank you.
So,
Director Ray, we'll come back to you.
I'm fine to stop.
Okay.
I just urge us to get going on this.
Thank you. Director Crompton.
I have a question and then a comment. We have a resolution on the table?
No.
We don't, okay.
We do.
Oh, sorry, to move second reading.
Yeah, so my question's for the chair. I heard it commented that have we done analysis that shows that taxes will go down as a result of this development? I missed that.
Through the chair, there was a fiscal impact analysis submitted with the development application. It is online. I'd have to pull it up to get all the details because it's been some time since I've looked at it. But the gist of what I remember of the fiscal impact analysis was really that the biggest concern was around the fire protection services, which we have been working to address, and that the voluntary negotiations, voluntary financial contributions that we have been negotiating will be addressing that shortfall, which was for the years 1 to 5.
The taxpayer there now will pay less taxes after the development's built?
I can't speak to that. It was just that overall the impacts will be manageable.
Okay, yeah, thank you. It's our job to ask questions and to develop a better project. I certainly am not gonna stop asking questions about trails and fire service. That's the job. And I'm very convinced by the idea that we should ask for more information. I think I'm going to vote in favor of second reading, but I do think that those are extremely reasonable requests, and are an example of the kind of information we should expect. And that's part of the process of engaging with staff and understanding these things better. So I'll look forward to seeing that stuff coming back as part of future reports if second reading is passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Richmond?
I wish I had a second entrance to Pemberton. I wish it had been planned years ago, because we have a congestion problem downtown that causes so many issues in our little town. This is what we call a planned community. Our job is to plan it, and to plan it well. I don't want to be walking there. How many times have we been somewhere where you're standing in a park or a road, you went, really, I can't get there without going all the way around here, or I wonder why they never thought about the following. It's our job to think about the following. I agree with Director Rainbow. I think Fine Peace has been very responsive to things that have been brought forward. I'm glad to hear the community has had a lot of input. I think this is our one and only opportunity to plan this community to a level that we feel is going to best serve the residents over the next generations. This has been come forward and gone away and come forward and gone away for a number of years now. I feel that if directors feel that I feel like we're getting a lot closer. I feel like I already hear some of the changes that were presented today, really great steps forward. And again, I think Fine Peace has shown themselves to be very responsive. And I feel we're very close to a point where it's digestible or ready to go to a public forum and public hearing. I feel like if we postpone that by a month because we want to include a few more details to make sure we get it totally right, because that's great. There might be trails for mountain bikes, but I really heard Director Elliott's comments about, well, we don't have any control over the MOTI roads, and we're hoping that they provide, commuter and active transportation options where we're not providing them on paths. I think that's a really good comment, and I'd like to know how that can get solved. I agree, we might not have electric cars in 20 years or 30 years, and that's why I made the statement that I think they should be committed until such point that there are other better options. Same with the transit. I don't think we're very far. I think we're really close to putting forward something that's really well thought out. I know it can be frustrating, and our job is not to slow this process down for nothing, I'm glad the community has had a lot of input, but it's our job to see the very big picture today, tomorrow, 50 years from now, and the whole corridor, as opposed to what will be great for me as a Furry Creek resident today. That's our job. And so I think that the points that have been brought forward have been very thoughtful and really good. And I think they are all brought forward with the intention of creating a really, really well-planned community. So I would be, not that I'd be happy to, but I'd be supportive to wait another month or so to incorporate these last few ideas and concerns over the fact that a community center is half the size of a monster home. So I'm happy to look at and wait on that. And I think if the board is willing to be patient and have staff come back and work with Fine Peace on a couple of these last details, then it'll be ready to bring forward to public hearing.
Are you suggesting just don't debate with it? Go ahead.
Through the chair, I just wanted to add some further information to the discussion here, if I may, around active transportation, because I've just been trying to review the land development agreement, which is very large and we've been working on for a long time. So we do have, I just want to clarify some of the process pieces that we have in place right now in the land development agreement specific to active transportation. So I didn't have that off the top of my head before. So I'm just reading from the land development agreement. With each development permit application authorizing subdivision of lands, and in the event before submitting an application to the approving officer for approval of a subdivision, The owner must submit to the Director of Planning and Development for his or her review and approval a transportation plan prepared by a qualified professional for the area of lands being subdivided and developed, showing the proposed layout and configuration of all roads, sidewalks, bicycle lanes, and recreational and pedestrian trails. The transportation plan submitted must give priority to the development of sidewalks, pedestrian pathways, and recreational trails. Include plans for development of pedestrian pathways, recreational trails. Generally shown in Schedule B12, provide for the connection of residential areas to pedestrian pathways and recreational trails, subject to approval of Ministry of Transportation, include plans for development of bicycle lanes within the network of roads and streets for the area being subdivided and developed. Make use of active transportation planning principles from the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure's Active Transportation Design Guide as revised or replaced from time to time. Just wanted to share that we do have many of those details established, and that those details would be reviewed at the development permit, subdivision development permit stage. And that those requirements are in the land development agreement. Apologies for not having that before, thank you.
It should all be right there.
I had Karen and then I have Director Demare. Director Elliott, you
I didn't
hadn't
raise my hand yet.
I'm sorry, I thought you did. Director Demare, and then I'll come back to you, Director Rainbow.
I'm just curious with the questions that have been asked, could they not be presented at the public hearing?
The content of the questions we've asked.
Exactly.
Responded to.
And if we get some answers prior to the public meeting, they could be presented. I'd like to see it move forward to third reading.
Through the chair, the one piece I think that has come forward that we would need to address before the public hearing, as it does relate to use and density, would be the single family GFA. Specifically, there were questions around the 700 meters squared for those 5 larger single family dwellings and the community center. And I would say that both of those could be revised right on like today, or we would need some board direction on those 2 points as well. Other than that, the other pieces can be information presented at the public hearing, correct?
Okay. Go ahead.
I'd like to follow on from what Sal just said. I would really like to see us move ahead to a public hearing. As I said, I would invite you all to come to it. And some of the questions that have been raised, let's deal with them there. I think Fine Peaks have probably got the answers to some of those questions already. I'd hate to see this delayed even another month. I look at the amount of work that our staff have put into this. This is not a 2-week job. I mean, this has taken months to put this together, and I think they've done a really good job with the wording, and with taking what we raised at first reading and incorporating it into this amendment for second reading. And I think the kinds of questions, if they have the ones that have the kinds of questions that have been asked. They're relatively minor, and they could be dealt with between now and third reading, and certainly between now and public hearing. So I would really like to see this move ahead, so that we can. Be nice to also bearing in mind that this group may not, well, it won't be together for that much longer. It will change, and I would hate to see this whole development stalled because a new board comes in and there's a whole lot of other questions, and has to move backwards and go through the process again. So I would urge you to pass this and to let us go ahead.
Go to Director Crompton. I see that Director Mack is back with us, but he's not in his screen, so, but he did want to make a comment. So you go ahead and then we'll go to Director Mack when he's back. And then Director Birch-Jones. and Director Elliott.
So to Ms. Dewar's point, if we don't let her do that work, then, and it is presented at third reading, or public hearing, I imagine if that change is made, then you need another public hearing, right? So if we go in with a recommendation as it sits, and then this board decides that what they hear is that those are too big or too small or whatever, and the density changes, that then you would need to go back to another, through the chair, you'd need to go back to another public hearing. Is that true?
That is correct. I guess if there is direction from the board regarding user density today, we should address that through resolution today.
Yeah.
And then we can make that change in advance of the public hearing, so it's presented as the board wants at the public hearing.
Yeah.
That's what we would need to do. We could just remove the 5 dwelling units that are extra large. That's just one example, but there could be any number of examples that the board puts forward here, but we would want that to be determined today in advance of the public hearing or at a later date if that's the direction the board wishes to go in.
Thank you.
Okay. Director Mack, you had your hand up before. Do you have a comment to make?
Yes, great discussion by everybody, but just listening to Director Rainbow, I think that, we should listen to the area director who has more knowledge and more, I guess, discussions with his constituents and what they would like to see. I think it's important to look into that. And as far as the issue with the fire protection, it doesn't matter. You will never get a ladder, as was said, that will go high enough to reach the top of some buildings. And so what they're proposing is more than adequate for what they're building. And obviously the David Mitchell and Associates are professionals in the business. Their advice should be taken. We shouldn't be second guessing what they're proposing, because what they are proposing is more than adequate for what's being presented. And let's not forget that all these units are sprinklered, so that makes a huge difference right there. But anyways, I would support second reading. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Birch-Jones, then Director Elliott, then Director Richmond.
I think all of this second guessing, I really think that's our job. I read this pretty critically, and yet when I hear some of the questions and observations, I think, why didn't I see that? Like, I would be pretty embarrassed and I would have missed this completely, that the community center is half the size of the monster lots. I didn't see that. Thank you. Because I'd be kind of embarrassed if we just went ahead with that the way it is. I'd like to change that. I think we do have a role in making this as good as we can. Overall, I'm really happy with it. I'm impressed with it. I appreciate there's been a lot of work that's gone into it, and I thank the staff for all of that as well. I'm really happy the bird-friendly windows are still part of the package. Bird Studies Canada is your reference for that, by the way. Just want to know where. And I'm wondering if we should make that change on density before we make our final decision on second reading, because that's what I would be most comfortable with.
Go ahead, Mr.
The other piece of information I wanted to add, because it's also sort of buried in the land development agreement, that has been really helpful for staff around the understanding how we can control height of the buildings in relation to fire services, is we have a set of provisions that basically set out let me just get the wording because it helps, but in the zoning bylaw, we speak to 6 stories or it's a maximum of 6 stories or 20 meters until we have fire protection services and equipment in place to basically meet taller buildings. And the land development agreement has even stronger, more detailed language that it gets to that point further. And essentially we have a check-in at every point in time. There's a building proposed above 6 stories. And so maybe there's an opportunity there to be like, hey, is that 22.7 ladder adequate? If not, maybe we're not going to 15 stories. Like we have built in to the land development agreement, these checks around building height, because it all is an area that it's hard to know till we get into the actual, like, what's that building made of? What's the road look like that's getting to it? Like we have that like sort of ability to look on a site specific basis. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion. And then happy to also hear where we go with the density piece.
I think I cut Director Birch Jones off, so carry on with your comments.
No, you didn't cut me off at all. I think, but I just don't know about how to put the wording together, but maybe Director Stoner could do that, just to move us more comfortably towards second reading possibly.
Okay, I'll go through my list here. Director Elliott, you're next on my list.
Thank you. I love so much about where this has gone now. The childcare work from first reading is outstanding, and to see that commitment by the developer to a 30% access rate is really appreciated with, because it's something that wasn't contemplated in a lot of the early planning in Squamish, and we're in a real crisis now. So it's so great to see that that's been followed through, and I love that there's actually infant toddler spaces in the first phase of that. It's one of the most needed pieces of the childcare continuum, and so great to see that there. And then the fact that they added the 50% below market rent is really fantastic, and that's about making sure that it stays affordable. And I like to see that the early childhood educators are included in that employment rental piece. It's just to tie all those pieces together is very thoughtful. The addition of meeting step code 4 is fantastic, and the shuttle bus north and south till we get regional transit on board. It's a real nod to our climate emergency, and as well as the e-bikes and the electric car share program, encouraging people to not necessarily have to have a car in every driveway or 2 cars. I think the approach to affordable housing and the diversity of housing is now very thoughtful and considered. And I like the fact that this development will get us closer to affordable home ownership. And it's really great to see that piece added, not just the affordable rental, but also units for affordable home ownership. I think things that are still giving me pause is I certainly would like to see that 110,000 geotech report come back in time for a 3rd reading. I think that just helps give the board peace of mind that it's not giving readings before it has all the facts. Although I don't suspect it will change anything. I just think it's more just a risk management piece for me. The piece that Director Stoner brought up about the size of the community center in relation to the monster homes is a piece that would make me refer this back to staff for another month rather than go to public hearing. I think that's an important thing that is not a resolution on the fly, but a conversation with the developer about there's a reason they've kept those 5 lots and what they imagine them for. And I don't necessarily want to sacrifice one for the other without understanding that context. I know we don't have control over the roads, and I sort of trust MOTI that they will consider bike lanes But I also don't know how wide our road right of way is. And so the idea that we may not get any separated bike lanes concerns me a little bit. And so that's another reason that I'd like that detail, and maybe a consideration of, is there anywhere on that trail network that we have now that some of the loops that are designated lower down, there's sort of a big loop and a small loop, is just thinking about whether we can make those more designated as multi-use pathways in places where folks with young kids or grandkids could take them off-road on a little bike ride through this development that's not going to force them to ride on the road, especially when we can't guarantee right now that it'll be a separated bike lane. And I imagine that people will choose whichever way they want to go about whether they want to ride their bikes or use the other trail network. But I think trying to secure some active transportation, at least from different parts of this development to the community center, I think would be pretty, and the commercial center would be helpful. And the only other thing, just from a future standpoint, is looking at the trail widths, is can they accommodate a trail machine? Because manually maintaining all of those trails will be challenging. And so are they wide enough for a trail machine that can zip through and do the clearing and do the sweeping and the brush backs? It would just be interesting to know if some of those are wide enough, or whether that will take a lot of manual labor. Something to consider. So my preference is to refer this back to staff, not for a long time. I think a lot of those questions the developer could turn around and bring back to us in a month's time.
Okay, I have Director Needham. Did you have some clarity that you wanted to share, or was that for something else? We can't hear you. Oh, there we
go. Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was having some difficulties. I think I had a little glitch in my modem there, so I was off for a couple of minutes. So I've just received a call from the developer, and I just wanted to relay some comments from them. They said that the large houses were intended for the founders, and he said they are willing to give those up if they can move this forward to a public hearing. He also stated that there will be lights on the bike paths. So that's what I wanted to pass along for the board's information. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. I have Director Richmond, then Director Demare, then Director Rainbow.
In an attempt to move it as forward, I was going to propose a friendly amendment that we go to give it second reading with the inclusion, or with the exclusion now, during those comments, of the monster lots, as we're calling them. You phrase that differently. You phrase that a little differently for the minutes. That's good. And some increased capacity for the community center. Similarly, I didn't want to just sort of pick a number for how big it should be. I don't want to make it up on the fly, but if there's a will to really get this moved forward to public hearing right away, then I would be willing to consider a friendly amendment that includes, again, the reduction of the large lots and the increase of the community center allotment.
Second.
I don't know if that's clear enough for a second, but.
Director Clark.
Well, I think that's a little beyond a friendly amendment.
Friendly amendment.
But there could be an amendment to add that before added that before for second reading that incorporates those changes. And then to give it as incorporating those changes, give second reading, but I'm not sure if Ms. Needham would agree that she's got enough information to make all those changes.
Director Needham, do you have enough to work with the amended motion?
Just to be clear, so the amended motion.
Director Needham, you're really broken. If you can turn off your video, we may be able to hear you.
You can't even hear you.
To remove the large home lots, or at least the large home from those lots, and to increase the size of the community center. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now, Chair?
Yes. Yeah, so we're removing the 5
Issues here.
lots.
So yes, and increasing the size of the community center, I'm guessing by a couple of thousand square feet.
I don't think we want to be prescriptive on that. We want advice from staff. You comfortable with that?
Okay. And are there any other changes that you see that would be required or is being requested by the board at this time? I mean, we've heard some of the other items, but we could provide details of those either at the public hearing or at third reading. Is that acceptable?
I'll go back to Mike as his amendment.
So I can't remember if it was Ms. Needham or Ms. Dewar that said it. It sounded like these were issues that should be altered before first reading. A lot of other items that were, I think, be it the active transportation, some of the other items that were brought up or mentioned here, sounded like they could be contemplated, discussed with the developer and brought back while giving it second reading now. These were the only 2 items that were required changing to provide second reading, but those other comments would still get incorporated in. Correct?
That is correct. So the use and
Yes.
density, any changes we would need to make before the public hearing. So that is one piece to consider. And the other piece that I remember hearing was around the 1 in 10,000 geotechnical study requiring that at third reading. So that is something.
That's the next motion. So we'll capture that in the next motion.
So, and as the chair said, I don't want to be prescriptive. I don't know if we have to give you a number, if you could come back with a number. I'd like to see the community center double at least, but I don't.
We don't want to throw that up.
Yeah, I don't want to just pick a number.
Yeah.
So, and just like, if we just say increase, then you can work with the developer and come bring that back. Like, that's good enough to give reading, and then you can bring that back for public hearing.
Through the chair, yes.
Okay. Director Rainbow?
Yeah, there is a community centre in existence now in Ferry Creek. It used to be part of Oliver's Landing Strata Corporation. Swimming pool, hot tub, sauna, meeting room, gym, change rooms. It's a really nice facility. And Fine Piece now own that. And they are taking memberships from people throughout the community. So it's not, originally it was just the Strata Corporation that owned it and restricted its use, but it's now open to the whole community. So that does exist at the moment. And I know that in the hotel proposal, there's a spa and swimming pool facility there, which will be available and open to the community. So there are some things other than this sort of meeting center, and I think that they're not looking at putting a gym and that kind of stuff in there. It's strictly a place for public hearings, for parents' meetings or whatever. So I have no problem with the idea of reviewing the size, but I'm not sure we want to dictate that it needs to be twice as big, or maybe it's not necessary when you consider the other facilities that are either in existence now or are planned. And then with regard to the homes, I mean, if Fine Piece has said they're prepared to just take those off the table, that's fine. I quite frankly, when I saw it, I don't know what those guys spent on that land. I don't know, it must have been in excess of $100 million or something like that. And they wanted some bigger homes for the people that own the company. I didn't see a problem with it. It's 1% of the total number of residences that are going to be built at Fir Creek. So it's not as though we're going to put a whole hillside full of 7,000 square foot homes. But again, if they're prepared to take those lots off the table, then I think we should do it. And as I've said, I don't know, too many times now, I'd really like to see us move ahead and go to second hearing.
So we have an amendment.
Public hearing, sorry.
That's okay. We have an amendment. We have it. Are you comfortable seconding it as it is amended appropriately? Go ahead.
So what is the word, is the wording something like that the 5 large lots be eliminated and the size of the community center be increased?
Yes.
I don't think we're not the lots,
Yeah.
the size of the house. What was the original
So we're
size
moving
before
the
they were
lots.
5,000 square feet?
So I'll just read the zoning bylaw includes a provision around gross floor area. The maximum gross floor area for a single family dwelling is 465 meters squared. Then there's a despite section, the above section, the maximum gross floor area for single family dwelling may be increased to 700 meters squared for up to 5 dwelling units in the CD3 zone. So the amendment could be to remove section 16.3.14.2 and just leave it as the maximum gross floor area for single family dwelling is 465 meters squared. That is one way to look at it.
Sounds clean.
Yep.
So does that mean we don't need that amendment, then we do it? Will you just suggest?
Well, this is the amendment.
That is it, okay, okay.
So that direction to remove that, staff remove that sentence fragment.
Yes.
And then we would proceed to second reading for each of them. So our amendment would be to add as a first that wording. And do we need to add the as amended for the second reading now that we've made this change in real time or not?
Chair, as the proposer of the amendment here, I don't want to get this wrong and I don't want to screw up. I'd like to know if staff is comfortable with where we're going on this, to take this to public hearing. I was just trying to find a way to incorporate some of the concerns here with the desire to move along, but I feel like it's taking a lot of painful work to get through an amendment and a motion, and therefore I wonder if we're crafting the right one.
Well, we are not going to get through our agenda today.
I know, so that's why, that's similar to the other proposal earlier, I'm just.
Yeah, I think maybe we send staff away to craft an appropriate resolution for this section and bring it back tomorrow. Like defer this until tomorrow. And anyone comfortable with that? Because I just, we still have a whole other meeting that we have to do today. That works for you?
We've got a motion that's moved and seconded. I'm not sure we can defer that.
Just put it to a vote, defeat it, put a motion on the table and send us away, because I think.
The amendment we need to defeat, which has no wording. We're going to defeat an amendment that has no clear wording.
Yeah, it can't be on the table unless we know what it is.
Yeah, it's not
So
true.
we haven't provided clear, so can I not just pull it?
Yeah.
The
And then
amendment?
defeat the motion of second reading of those first three that's, because that was first and seconded.
If we defeat second reading,
It kills the application.
So we don't want to do that.
No.
Can we not just pause it? Why do we have to put it to a vote now? Can we not just defer it till tomorrow with the motion as it is?
I'm pretty simple, so I would say yes, but there may be many procedural reasons.
Yeah, I'm with Craig.
But I would say, yeah, I mean,
That's the best line of the day.
we're tying ourselves in knots, I think.
I think we could make that motion with that, removing that 700 square meters.
so through the chair, it could just be a motion to remove the 700 meters squared gross floor area provision and look to increase the community center size.
Yes.
Perfect.
I feel like giving it a day and maybe giving the staff a chance to speak to the developer who might have some thoughts, and the community might just make it a better motion tomorrow. I just want to come up with the best motion possible. If we have the ability to
call it right now and defer further discussion and voting till tomorrow, that would be my preference. That would give us a little time. If we have to remove the motion and that, again, I'm trying to avoid making the wrong motion on the fly because we're trying to get through this quickly, or not quickly, but
We're not
trying to get through it.
I think I made that motion, didn't I? For the first few that's.
Yeah.
So can I request it be taken off?
No.
No, I'm not allowed to do that.
Second.
So, not to add to confusion, but Director Richmond, you put an amendment on the table, correct? And the amendment was seconded? So there is an amendment, whether we can remember what it wasn't seconded?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
I don't think we knew what it was, so I'm not sure.
This is what we've been talking about for the last 25 minutes, so.
So then I would say if we don't know what it was, there wasn't an amendment. And so if you want to push pause with your motion on the table, then tomorrow we could come back with a recommended amendment to that motion and carry on. Or I also think Ms. Duber's put a reasonable option, but it's up to the board to determine.
I like Ms. Duber's option.
And again, it gives a day for the developers to maybe have some thoughts of what they heard today too, and talk to staff. I'm for the pause, but yeah.
My understanding is that you can table a motion to a future date.
Yeah.
And so this resolution's on the table. I think we can table it till tomorrow.
Okay. Do I have a seconder to table, do I need a seconder to table it? Or do I
Yes,
just-
you need a seconder and it is not.
That's great. You look more confused than I am. That's Kristen.
Absolutely. I've never been more certain.
Sal is seconding it. No debate. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Lots to work with. So much stuff.
Man, way more than you need.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Claire.
Claire.
Thanks, Kim.
Where would you like to go?
Home.
No. Yes, you want to wrap that and be done with it? Okay, I'm gonna call for a 6-minute recess so everyone can get up and stretch. And we'll be back.
Good call.
6 minutes.
I'm jumping out the window.
And then we're heading on
To regional.
Very offensive sign.
Save one of those, I'm gonna take one of those cabbages and take one of those
Nope.
with me.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we are going to skip ahead in the open agenda to item 15, where we call for a recess of the open board meeting until tomorrow to allow for us to do the committee of the whole starting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. here in this room. And so we'll make that motion. Moved by Jack, seconded by Sal. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. And now, Director Birch Jones and Director Demare, you're welcome to stay and join us, or you're welcome to leave if you like.
I'm out of here.
Okay. We'll see
You know
tomorrow at
what?
9.
Your hospital district could learn a thing or two.
Oh, sorry. If you want to stick around. Okay, now we are going to call to order the Regional Hospital District.
Thank you.
Is this different? Oh, could I give you these? Yeah. No, it should be.
No,
There's nothing proposed in regional hospital?
No.
Oh, okay.
just a placeholder, I guess.
Yeah, it's just a placeholder.
All right, could I have someone move approval of the agenda, please? Moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Richmond. Anyone opposed? We're in the regional hospital district. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Could I have someone move the consent agenda? Moved by Director Richmond, seconded by Director Stoner. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Business arising from the minutes. And 8.1, CA update.
Thanks, Chair, nothing at this time.
Okay. And 8.2, Vancouver Coastal Health, their request for the approval of capital project share requests. And the report came before you last month and it was deferred. The total that they're requesting is $239,000. Director Stoner.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to this briefly because there were a few members who were not at last month's meeting. And so we did defer this. We were also running late at last month's meeting. So we didn't have a huge amount of time for discussion. The representatives from BCH did come and present on this, and we were able to ask primarily around the timing of the CT scanner, because I think that that has some impact to this discussion. And there was no commitment from the folks at the BCH side that this would come in the next year, definitely not from their perspective, and even 2 years felt like it was a little bit out of reach. So just wanted to give that context to board members as we consider these requests that have come forward. I know it's been our priority as of late to try and get the funding in place for that CT scanner. But it seems like from the BCH side, there will be some delay in that timing. So just wanted to provide that context.
Okay, I see Director LaFrance has come on. Welcome and thank you for being here to help answer questions for us. My question is, we increased our requisition this year to accommodate for unforeseen requests that may come in after our budgeting process was complete. Can you tell us how much we've got to play with at that in those two requests, the 239,000 plus the unknown figure of a CT scanner, which doesn't give you a whole lot to. Did they give you a number?
But can I just?
Sorry.
Yeah, that my hand is up because of the CT scanner. I forget the doctor's name who presented to us.
Okay.
Hanson, it sounded like he like in his mind, it wasn't gonna happen for a couple or 3 years. Anyway, like he's working, or that group is working towards getting it in, but there was a recognition it was gonna take a couple of years. So I think in terms of our funding, and correct me if I heard it wrong, I think in terms of our funding, we want to consider putting funding aside for the CT scanner. But in terms of VCH's response to not having any, I think we can budget some money this year and next year and continue to advocate to VCH that we want to see them include that as part of their operations. But I don't think, it wasn't a surprise that they weren't going to be looking at any money for that this year. Does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah. I will just add to that there is still, Dr. Cranston still spoke to the immediate need of the CT scanner. So there's a challenge and a process with VCH, but from a doctor's perspective, they were definitely still speaking to how it was a asset that they would have liked to have last year.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'd like to emphasize that if Dr. Cranston was suggesting that the CT scanner wasn't coming for a couple of years, it wasn't because he thought that was okay. Yeah, it should have been there last year, definitely should be here this year. And they want it by next year at the latest, you know.
What I'm saying is realistically, he knows that that's not like when we, like, I think we need to keep fighting the fight for it and and decide what we want to fund on that. But he realistically, or in his mind, realistically, it wasn't going to happen with VCH. So I think, yes, the need is yesterday. Yes, we want to supply that need. No, it's not going to happen this year. So in terms of the budget conversation, let's discuss how much we want to put towards that this year and then again next year. But VCH wasn't going to put anything towards it this year.
No, they said, and I think his phrase was, we might consider it the next. I don't think he committed. And so I would like to see us be really strong with VCH. If we agree to pave their road and build a new toilet for them this year, then, and I'm not entirely convinced we should agree to that, but if we do, then it should go with the message that forget coming to a centre for anything next year other than a CT scan. We don't want to see any more light bulbs or insulation or any of that kind of stuff. And really push them, really let them know we're really serious. And it's not, well, we might consider it next year. They have to consider it next year.
I hear you. CEO, did you want to say what you just said to me?
Just I followed up with the gentleman that presented at the last board, just to understand their capital process, which you probably know well, and try and understand how the desire for a CT scanner fits into their broader capital process. So they mentioned they were aware of it, and I just wanted to highlight the importance that I know you've been advocating for, that master capital plan for the region, which would help inform the priorities that ultimately come to the board for cost sharing. And I think that the challenge with Vancouver Coastal Health is truly engaging the board and giving the board the opportunity to speak for the needs of folks in the Sea to Sky region, so it's incorporated into that master plan and that annual conversation, because this is an afterthought. Right, engaging you at this point in the year, they've done their capital program, and it's complex and it's deliberate and it's professional. They go to a separate board for approval, and then they come to you to sort of get what is in effect a rubber stamp for approval. So, I think the process needs to be addressed as well, or the board will likely wind up in the same spot.
Yeah.
So what we know from our conversation with VCH is that CT feasibility study is done. They know exactly where it's going to go in the hospital. They know it's going to cost about $4 million plus. And so I think that what they need to deliver to us is a timeline, and then we'll write them a check for the other pieces. So I'm not giving them $239,000 without a pathway to a CT scanner.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'll also be voting against. I think the process is just backwards. I think the intention of this money is that we have a meeting like this where we strategically plan what's important to our community, and then we give them an option list of things that we'd be interested in spending our money on. And if they'd like to join us in those, they do. For as long as I've been involved, the process has been the reverse. They come to us long after their budgeting process has been done to try and use our money on random things. So I would hope that the Sea to Sky Hospital District on the other side of the election would meet very early and have sort of a strategic planning, what's important to our community's conversation, and regularly every year in the right timing, lay out what our priorities are and send them to them. So I'll be voting to oppose this.
Okay. CEO.
And the time for that and speaking to them is actually the fall, and it's not part of their process right now, and it clearly needs to be.
Yeah.
So are my two colleagues here saying they don't want to support any of these requests? Or are you saying, like I heard you say, I won't support anything without a path to the CT, which I'm leaning that way. Are you saying you don't support any funding of this?
If you guys can accomplish the path to the CT, then I'll consider voting in favor of this.
But like you don't want to fund any of this?
I don't think that's the purpose of this fund. This fund was originally set up to promote local priorities, and we've done it before. We've had the helipad, we've had the Pemberton Clinic, we've had the Sea to Sky Hospice. We have used our money in ways that we believed met our priorities, and I just don't think paving is a local priority that's different than what people on the island or in Vancouver care about. That is the specific job of the provincial government to fund, like to offer healthcare services. This fund is so that this is the way I see the fund. We can go to VCH and say, this is important to us and we have some money. Would you like to join us in it? And they can say no or yes. In the past, they've said yes. And so I think we should save the money and spend it in directions that we think are important to us. So
They're not gonna not do these projects because we don't give them $239.
They will do these things.
They will do them without our money.
Yeah.
Okay, so I agree with you guys. I think that we have made ground that we didn't have this time last year. Karen and I have met with the new VP, and we've made an appointment for our next meeting,
Nice.
which is good. It's not an easy process. I think but it's also no surprise to VCH that we're holding our money for local priorities. And I think that we've built the expectation that we will hold out until we kind of move this CT along. So I think it's certainly worthwhile for us to say, give us confirmation that this CT is coming and timelines, and then we can release the funds. So we can make a resolution right now to request the timeline to the CT.
So sorry, what?
The motion is to write a letter to Vancouver Coastal requesting a timeline to achieving the CT in the Sea to Sky corridor in Squamish. Yep.
Did Ms. LaFrance respond to your question about how much money we have?
She's still sitting here wondering, when do I get to speak?
Wonder no longer.
Director LaFrance, tell us.
All right. Hi, everyone, I'm the Director of Finance for the SLRD, but also the Sea to Sky Regional Hospital District. And as of today, we have 956,740 unallocated reserve. And then the VCH last request was 239,600, and so that leaves $717,140 if we were to fund the VCH request. So the other caveat is each year, if we keep the same requisition, we could increase the unallocated reserve about $500,000 each year with, say, I was just doing a quick calculation to see what an increase to the requisition would offer of 20%. And it looks as though if everything else stays the same, because I haven't looked at the debt servicing if those interest rates are changing anytime soon. Sorry, I'm just doing this quickly as I talk with you. It looks as though we would have, with no other projects coming down the pipe, if we increased the budget for 2023 by 20%, sorry, double checking I didn't miss anything. It looks like we could have a very large amount for contingency of it would increase it about 150,000. So, and you can't keep me to that number because it's just a quick calculation, but I can do a more fulsome review and bring it back to the board. But it could be at least 650,000 next year if we increase to 20%. So
25 this year.
Yeah, so 650 on top of the 956 that we have right now.
Yeah, 1.6 next year.
And we're not looking to fund the whole thing ourselves.
No.
The foundations will be involved in this, and so it's good to hear that we've got that kind of power. Did you have a comment?
No, I was just adding up with
Okay.
Suzanne was going.
I hear what you guys are saying about the path of the CT. I just feel like what was the strongest is we're spending our 239 that you're asking for on a CT scanner. So tell us when we can get the CT scanner. It feels very like matter of fact. We want, no thanks. We'd like to spend it on a CT scanner. When can we get a CT scanner?
Yep.
So, yeah, I think, I agree with the general direction. And I think I wanted to, before we made the motion on the letter, I think the letter should include a lot more detail about what, similar to what Jack just said. I do wonder about the washroom. I don't know if that one's going to get done without additional funds or if that one gets done, but that one to me seems like a worthwhile project. So I just wanted to throw that out there. the fact that in post-operative recovery, you have to leave building and use a public washroom outside of the pre-op area seems wrong. I would like to see them fix that themselves. Considering we do have a fairly healthy fund, I'm wondering if the board would like to consider that expense and leave the other ones to their general maintenance. But so I'm just throwing that out there for consideration. If we want to fund that one and then say, that's it, that's all you're getting this year, it's for that and specifically for that, you can do it over else, your own funds. And we're really not too keen on considering much else until you show us what the path is to the CT scanner. And to your point, I wanted to say, Dr. Cranston did say they're raising money in a number of different areas. So we don't even know what they're coming to us for, whether it's $100,000 or $1 million. We don't know what they need for the CT scanner.
Chair?
Director Mack?
Yeah, just something for future consideration. I was in the clinic there last week at our clinic, Pemberton, and our x-ray machine is to the point now where the doctors at Lionsgate won't accept x-rays sent to them from Pemberton because they are for the most part unreadable. So that's something that has to be rectified, obviously, because driving all the way to Lionsgate to get x-rays done is not a very good thing. So it's just something to put on the wish list, I guess. Anyways, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Mack. And personal experience, yes, you do have to go to Lionsgate for very simple diagnostics. It has been the story of my life the last 5 weeks. So anything we can do to support our region, staying within our region for basic medical care is extremely important to us. With that, do you want to, I don't want to rush to a motion, but I do feel like we've got a couple of motions here. So to support the bathroom.
I move that we write a letter to VCH that says our priority is the CT scanner for the Squamish Hospital. And we would be happy to release the $104,000 for the washroom as soon as you deliver to us a timeline and a path to a CT scanner.
That's super clear.
I thought my motion had a seconder.
No, we didn't get there because we didn't want to let you just run with it.
No.
I'm almost certain it had a seconder.
Because I was trying to get you to say I wanted more in the letter.
Yeah.
Just a question for the board. So the process is broken in terms of the board being meaningfully engaged in a timeline that would allow you to influence their decision making. Do you want to consider the letter noting that and calling for a change to the process and meaningful engagement of the board in a timely manner so that the priorities of the region as expressed by the board are built into their process? Because that would be a fun one to engage them on. I'd like to do it.
100%.
We have written that letter at least twice.
100 times.
Yeah.
But we should do it again.
Yeah,
Do it again. We should do it again. Does she have a seconder yet?
I haven't acknowledged the secondary yet.
Can I ask her a question?
Yes.
Can you remove the toilets? Like, we're talking about, I'll second your motion. We're talking about a broken process that we've been talking about for 10 years. And I would appreciate like us taking a stand on it.
I withdraw my motion.
Oh, you won't let me second a different motion?
Okay, go.
I agree with you, and we need to take that strong stand. I think it's really interesting that Craig has come up with that already, because we've been saying that for a number of years. We've also, Craig, been saying at the same time, not only is it backwards, the process, but we need this friggin' master plan in place so that it informs the whole conversation to begin with. We've pushed in whatever venue we've been at for that, and we'll continue to do so. I agree with you in taking a hard line, but I feel it's still at the expense of the patient that has to walk outside to go to the bathroom after the operation.
Yeah, they're not going outside.
It's the same as there will always be that thing. That's why they put those things in the requests, because they're like, yeah, it sucks to drive your car along a bumpy road that should be paved when you've got stitches in your stomach and you're feeling, yes, I know that there's a ton of things that the province has not funded in the healthcare system, and they should. But it doesn't mean that they should then access the resources that were intended for something different to do those things. Because the list they could put together of things that you would feel compelled by is really long. It's the healthcare system. And it feels to me like we should be engaging in this process of fixing the way we do things. And I believe the reason it's the very top of the list for them is because it just dropped out of the stuff that they could fund. I bet you they fund it next year because it was the thing that just dropped off the bottom. And so they sent it to Mike and Jack and sorry to offend everyone.
And let's face it, if you look at that, the toilet, what does it mean? First of all, the operations they do at Squamish are not as complicated and as difficult as some of the ones they do in other hospitals. So if you can't get out of bed after your operation, they have things called pans that they shove in there, and you don't have to go to the washroom. And if you can get out and get into a wheelchair, who cares if you have to wheel down the hallway a little bit? And if you're ambulatory, you need the exercise, and so you walk to the washroom. It's not a big deal.
Okay, well, I would like to include then that if we're going in that direction, that the letter be phrased, you know, we will be willing to consider other funding operations once we see that there's a path to the CT scanner, as well as a master plan being worked on, as well as fixing this broken process in the way we've described many different times.
That's a motion.
That's a terrible motion.
It's a good one. I like it.
We can go back and clean that up, but I think the intention is clear. Everyone clear on the intention?
Yep.
Karen, you had your hand up. You're happy?
That's your happy face.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
I think continuing down this path for the next 10 years is a good idea.
All right.
She got more patience than me.
Thank you for that. I'll call the question. Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. Anyone else on this? No? Moving along. Chair's verbal report. I will just take this moment to thank you all for supporting me through the last 8 weeks of really horrific journey through the medical system. And I'm not done yet, but it's been a journey. I've seen some pretty shocking things in our care system that has informed how I do this work. And I'm happy to share that with you guys over lunch someday, but I've received the best of care and I've received some of the very worst care that I'm glad that I'm here to be with you guys. So that's my verbal report. Is there any late business? Or can I have someone move receipt of my verbal report? Moved by Director Richmond, second by Director Rainbow. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Any late business? Any notice of motion? Seeing none, let's move to adjourn this meeting. Moved by Director Stoner, second by Director Elliott. Anyone
That
opposed?
table is
Thank you very much.
enthusiastic.